In this world, the Empire not only had holy power, but also powerful dark magicians, but the latter had been strictly forbidden since ancient times, so everyone was wary of them. What can we say about the fear of zombies, which were always puppets of dark magicians after being revived? And the heroine became the only person who dared to write a guide about zombies. Despite the general prohibitions, she carefully hid these creatures from the society of aristocrats. No one around even suspected that, in fact, he had not been communicating with people for a long time. This misfortune happened to almost the entire Walker family, and young Lady Julia was no exception. As a zombie, she hadn't had much time to get used to her new life, which is why she made mistakes. If it weren't for her sister Emily, who was the one who started this problem, then the whole mask would have fallen asleep. Our heroine accidentally resurrected her family, and therefore tried to hide its new state. Lady Walker had never been so collected and attentive at any event before. This is because any mistake on the part of loved ones could lead to the complete exposure of the entire family. That's why Miss ran from Yulia to Isak, and from Isak to Edmund, to help everyone in time. This way, for example, the guy managed to hide the fact that his skin was extremely cold and lifeless. Emily was only glad that she was able to come up with an excuse for each family member. But there were situations like the broken glass, for which even the heroine was not prepared. At such moments, the servants always asked for forgiveness, but as if that could fix anything. No matter how wise Duke Walker was, he still didn't know how to cope with his new body. The danger was that the zombie had no blood, and any human could notice this. That's why it was so important to fake a terrible wound so that everyone would believe it existed. If it weren't for Emily, Edmund would hardly have gotten out of this unpleasant situation so gracefully. The assistants were right there, as they were always worried about the gentleman from the Walker family. However, this time, the young duke did not need the help of strangers who were ordinary people. So the aristocrats at the banquet had no choice but to send the entire family home. Only in their carriage could the Walkers breathe a sigh of relief, as there were no people's gazes around them. What each of them feared most was that the identity of those who died in the family would become known to the public. Only the heroine could help her sister and brothers, but even she had difficulty hiding the secret. But she loved each of them, and that's why she couldn't abandon them in their difficult moment of death. And now, Duke Walker was forced to feel uncomfortable in such a high position, and the leader of the knights, Isaac, was generally afraid to go to work, because he could be discovered. This whole terrible tragedy with the death of the Walker family happened on a quiet forest road a week ago. Then they all calmly rode in the carriage to the youngest, not even suspecting that they would soon die. Since Ander Walker's initiation was about to begin, the family was late for him. That's why they decided to take a shortcut through the forest. But at some point, the carriage began to shake dangerously. Then, one of the brothers managed to push Emily out of the carriage, but he was unable to save anyone else. This is how it all ended up, with only the heroine remaining safe and sound during their trip. The girl immediately heard unfamiliar voices that wished death on the entire Walker family. At that moment, she had to wait until the unknown men in cloaks left the scene of the tragedy. It was only after these people had left that Emily dared to emerge from her humble hiding place. The heroine's heart beat wildly with fear, because she already suspected what she would see now. Near the carriage, all the girl's worst fears were confirmed, as the family was dead. A terrible pain seized the girl from the realization that there had been a complete attack on her family. The mutilated bodies of loved ones left no doubt that none of them could have survived. No matter how desperately mishoped for a positive outcome, it was all pointless. A terrible tragedy unfolded in this forest, and no one in the world could help the Walker family. What hurt Emily the most was the fact that she was left all alone next to Andrea. While no one was looking, the girl gave in to her pain and despair, which consumed her entire mind. But this lasted until one creature finally got out of the broken carriage. The whole point was that a powerful demon had been living in Leo's pet cat since childhood, and now this creature was unhappy that its beautiful appearance had undergone changes. Only at this moment did the heroine realize that she could turn to a powerful demon for help. If she makes a contract with Leo, she will become a full-fledged dark mage, despite the prohibitions. The demon was only too happy to enter into a contract with the girl, which was beneficial to him. This is how Emily brought her family back to life, even if she ended up turning them into dead zombies. All this was done in order to visit their beloved Andrea at the Academy for Aristocrats. It was very important for the boy that his family showed up at his initiation ceremony, So when none of the walkers showed up, bitter tears welled up in the little boy's eyes. But everything changed as soon as the boy heard the voices of his loved ones, which were heard very close by. The young heir immediately threw himself into the arms of his brother, for whom he had waited so long and patiently. Andrea didn't see his family very often because of his studies, but he was still always happy to see them. Since childhood, Isak took the most care of his younger brother, so they had a strong relationship. But that didn't mean Andrea wouldn't smile when she saw Emily, Julia, and Edmund. The boy's happiness was not betrayed when he realized that the whole family had come for her dedication. At that moment, none of the zombies understood what the heroine had done, so they silently played along with her. And Emily tried to create a friendly atmosphere so that Andrea would not doubt his choice. Thanks to her efforts, the young heir of the Walker family blossomed into a joyful smile. But all this did not save the girl from a serious evening conversation with her outraged family. Each family member wanted to hear the truth about what exactly had happened to them recently. Everyone noticed obvious changes, but did not know how to explain this state to themselves, and only the heroine knew that she had turned her dead brothers and sister into real zombies. It was not surprising that the family reacted negatively to such terrible news about themselves. Rumors of zombies have always represented the worst possible essence, although they were far from the truth. At the moment of death of her loved ones, the heroine had no other choice, so she acted at her own discretion. The girl did not expect that her words would cause so much fear and horror in Yulia that she planned to live on. The lady devoted her entire life to experiments and did not manage to complete even half of them, and now she learned that she was dead, which severely limited her research capabilities. Surprisingly, Isak calmly accepted the truth that he was now something like a zombie. The boy knew from childhood that Emily had hidden dark and powerful magic powers inside her. Recently, the heroine was able to awaken them, thereby binding the souls of her relatives to their bodies. But all this did not fit into the head of Yulia, who feared death more than anything else in the world. This news came as a shock to every walker, as such truths were always difficult to accept. Emily not only resurrected her loved ones, but also finally became a dark magician, which was forbidden. Out of frustration, the emotional Isak was louder than the others in his indignation, waving his arms. And this resulted in one of the guy's hands falling off with a crack, since the body was fragile. Even the heroine didn't expect that the zombies she created would hold up so poorly after being resurrected. If the guys hadn't seen severed body parts during fights before, they would have definitely fainted. The closest to this state was Yuli, who until now denied the events surrounding her. The only thing that saved her from losing her mind was that she was already dead and felt almost nothing. The girl remembered better than anyone that certain abilities were always passed down in their family. But even Edmund could not predict that Emily would suddenly awaken dark magic within herself. The worst thing was that at present, all dark magicians were immediately executed within the Empire. If only the heroine had immediately hidden the bodies of her family, she would have had fewer problems. But Emily couldn't do that, because only she and Andrea were left alive. As soon as everyone finds out that Yuli, Isak, and Edmund are dead, Emily will be immediately removed from her current status, and guardianship of Andrea will be given to some family that will gradually rob the walkers. That's why Emily wanted her loved ones to wait just 7 years until Andrea grew up. But in the current situation, Isak wasn't sure that they would be able to survive this time, while Edmund understood that they had no other choice, for the sake of Andrea's future. The whole family found itself in an extremely difficult situation, because only Emily was alive now. While the discussions were going on, Isak again reminded that he did not have a severed arm. Only the heroine was able to help her brother with this problem, because it was she who brought him back to life. True, the girl was such a weak dark magician that she was not confident in her powers. But action was always better than inaction, so Emily boldly dismissed all doubts. And in the end, Isak's hand grew back onto his wrist, as if the guy had never lost it. For the first time in a long time, the heroine felt that she was finally giving vent to the magic within herself. The lady was afraid that her family would not support her magic and decision, but everything turned out to be exactly the opposite. For Edmund, the dark magic within his sister was direct proof that she was a walker. So the older brother reassured Emily, causing a sweet and joyful smile to appear on her face. But in reality, Duke Walker was deeply troubled by everything that had happened to them. He could only tell the whole truth about his feelings to his brother, because he was always able to understand him. The number of their enemies was too vast, and even the priests could be involved in it. So the brothers could only hope that Emily would be okay in the future. Unlike her loved ones who became zombies, the heroine still felt tired after a hard day. But even in her room, she could not rest, because a cunning demon had been waiting for her there for a long time. Leo was sure that the girl had already had a taste of the power that had been hidden within her for a long time. Emily really did feel a constant power inside her that was gradually increasing. Only a demon would be happy if the girl suddenly unleashed the powers that had been kept locked away until now. But the heroine knew from the very beginning how cunning and insidious the ally in the cat's body was. She never forgot for a moment that this demon should not have been allowed into the human world. And even now, this creature demanded blood and spectacle, because it was bored without tragedy. But the girl's plans did not include conquering the world, just because she signed a contract. So the cat will have to continue to be bored while his owner tries to save her family. If only someone else could hear the demon's words, then he wouldn't have shouted at the whole estate in vain. But for the entire Walker family, Leo's identity remained unclear, and Andrea thought only about his studies. All the adults saw the boy off with joyful smiles, hiding their anxiety from him. But in reality, the anxiety inside them did not subside, because the bodies of Yulia, Isak, and Edmund underwent changes. They noticed that they did not feel cold, and even nutritious food no longer seemed tasty to them. The only option Edmund saw in this situation was a temporary vacation for everyone. The Duke hoped that during this time, they would be able to figure out how to continue living as zombies. Isak had good thoughts about taking a vacation, since he hadn't taken a day off from his job for a long time. Only Emily had to continue to pretend that nothing had changed in her work and everyday life. Duke Walker hoped for the consciousness of his sister, who was able to bring them back to life with dark magic. Emily herself had long wanted to learn at least something about her powers, but there was too little public information. Even the brothers had difficulty finding books on dark magic, and they still had to get them somehow. But the Walker family was not one to give up so easily because of unforeseen circumstances. Edmund was always ready for any difficulties, which is why he was appointed to the role of Duke by universal suffrage. But the boy couldn't even imagine that the butler would bring news about the refusal to grant leave to their brother Isak. No one in the family expected this turn of events, as they had always been allowed to take time off without any problems before. Isaac was the one who was most indignant about this, since he had always completed all of the emperor's tasks on time. But in the end, the ruler treated his subjects so unfairly because he needed strength. But all this did not change the fact that the heroine had to go to work as secretary to the heir to the throne. In the imperial palace, she could only rely on Lady Jamie, who always helped her. And this time, the heroine felt grateful to her friend, since she covered for her tardiness. Jamie was one of those people who could easily resolve any dangerous situation in the workplace. That's why Emily quickly began to consider this lady her friend, because many good things happened between them. The appearance of Prince Tristan Baelund somewhat ruined the girls' plans for fruitful communication. The heir valued real deeds more than their endless discussion in practice, so he was noticeably displeased when Lady Walker distracted him with some important matter. It turned out that the girl simply asked for a temporary leave, since her home was a complete mess. But the absence of such a good worker was not to the advantage of the prince, who was already unable to cope with affairs. He had never encountered Emily thinking about weekends at all before. And then her brother asked for a day off, which immediately seemed strange for the heir to the throne. The girl could barely explain that they had simply planned a trip as a family while they had the opportunity. But Tristan couldn't please his best assistant by approving of vacation days. The heroine would never have thought that taking a vacation would be such a difficult task. Balandu even had to mobilize part of the army, for which Isak was responsible as leader. Although the prince could not yet reveal the reasons for his actions, he was sure that he would need all his strength. Only now did Emily realize that she hadn't thought through a backup plan for herself in case of refusal. Naturally, she should have stayed close to Isak, who was still serving in the imperial palace. But then the girl's thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise, as the prince's faithful assistant burst into the room. It turned out that Werner had learned that Isak was now, for some reason, on the platform next to the knights. What frightened the heroine most was the reason why her brother could attract attention at all. It turned out not to be as scary as Emily thought, because no one revealed her brother's dangerous secret. Werner didn't keep them waiting for long, and reported that Knight Harold and Isaac had decided to have a duel. They had been longtime rivals of each other, so such a competition was not to be missed. And the prince's assistant was one of the first to bet on Harold, since he believed in his quick victory. If only the heroine had the opportunity, she would prefer not to get involved in this whole fight thing. But Miss initially suspected that this whole situation would certainly interest the prince, and she turned out to be right, since the heir could not ignore this kind of situation. Tristan's heart beat happily when the opportunity presented itself to somehow entertain himself during the workdays. This is how the lady found herself in a situation that was not at all pleasant for her due to anxiety and worry. Emily had no right to abandon her brother in trouble, so she had to agree to watch him. In fact, Isak himself understood that he shouldn't have given in to this adventure with a duel. Harold always acted as if Emily was the worst member of the Walker family, which her brother couldn't stand. That's why this time he decided to personally deal with the smug face of the unpleasant knight. Everyone around was only glad to have the opportunity to personally observe the development of events. Harold had been trying to get a duel with Isak for quite some time to test his strength in practice. And so, after some time, the guy succumbed to constant provocations because his patience ran out. The heroine was most afraid that her brother would accidentally reveal his current state in the form of a dead zombie. The girl was so deep in thought that she did not immediately notice the approach of the heir to the throne. Tristan was interested in whether Isak was really ill, as he had been told lately, and the girl had no choice but to confirm the rumors that she herself had spread. The guy really did seem pale, although no one could have guessed that the reason was his death. The host did not delay the start of the battle, because the spectators were already clamoring for a duel between the knights. Harold was the first to boldly rush into battle, so that the general admiration for his actions would increase. If it weren't for his recent death, Isak would have been able to easily repel any attack from the enemy. But in this situation, the guy's body was failing him so much that he couldn't control his weapons and limbs properly. But even at that moment, Harold felt that Isak was still parrying his attacks well. This only made the boy even more eager to defeat the knight, who was always considered better than him. Their battle was a heated spectacle, as the speed of the battle constantly increased. Only the heroine was worried about the end of the duel, which could end with everyone understanding the essence of Isak. So she urgently needed a plan to save her brother, so that their disguise would not end because of one fight. A sudden idea came to the girl's head, who had been looking around carefully all this time. She was recovered enough to use very little dark magic. The only salvation in this situation the heroine found was a surprise attack from the air, which could be organized. So Miss extended her dark magic tentacles towards the chandelier on the ceiling to make it fall down. According to her plans, the chandelier was supposed to fall right on the knight's platform, but not hit any of them. The lady's help came just in time, as Isak noticed that Harold was using mana in a wooden weapon. Only the sudden rise of smoke saved the aristocrat from further battle. The chandelier made such a huge noise that there was no longer any talk of continuing the battle. After the fog cleared, only one figure of the winner was visible in the center of the ring. It was Harold, but he didn't at all consider himself the winner in such a strange situation. The whole point was that at the very last moment, Isak pushed the knight away from the main blow. Despite everything, by order of the prince, the guys had to stop the duel that people had come to. But for the heir, the safety of his subjects came first after the fallen chandelier. So Tristan could no longer allow the competition, even if it would have gone on without problems. Belland always tried to take care of people, even if it was contrary to his personal interests. That's why he let Isak go home, because he became even paler after the hard fight. Only after this was the heroine able to breathe freely, as she had been too tense all this time. But the girl didn't expect that her emotions would suddenly become noticeable to the heir to the throne. It turned out that the prince had not just noticed the lady, who came from the famous Walker family. The heroine immediately tensed up when the guy mentioned that she could have inherited powers. Tristan suspected that the girl could sense dark magic, as he noticed her agitation. But the first thing Emily thought of was that the heir had revealed her possession of these powers. But she hadn't even thought through escape routes, in case her abilities were actually discovered. But then Werner stood up for the girl, who looked clearly frightened by the prince's words. Tristan clearly didn't expect his assistant to blame everything on his inability to communicate with girls. From their intonation, the heroine realized with relief that the guys actually hadn't guessed anything. This realization saved Emily from rash actions like a quick and impetuous escape. Tristan and Werner noticed that Miss was looking at the chandelier in advance, as if she knew that it would fall. Recently, the assistant has noticed more than once that dark magicians have become very active in the Empire. But until now, good instruments for detecting their magical powers have not been created. So even in that situation, Werner wasn't entirely sure that there was dark magic around. But one of the devices detected her impulses, which is why the assistant began to pay attention to everything around her. Only the heroine understood that in fact the knight had discovered her dark powers, so she didn't expect the boys to ask her to participate in their search for the cursed wizards. The expression on Tristan's face told the lady that the prince was greatly hoping for her help. But how could Emily even look for others like herself when she barely knew how to use magic? However, the girl was afraid that she might be removed from the role of secretary, which was now needed. That is why the lady did not refuse Tristan, although his proposal was too dangerous for her. The prince was only glad that he would have another reliable and skilled assistant in this matter. He even raised Emily's salary just to keep her from changing her mind about supporting him. As soon as the heroine joined the team, she learned about the dark magicians imprisoned on the island. For a long time, the priests managed to hold back their attempts to break out of the prison. While the dark magicians were locked away, the light ones were busy preparing for their future breakthrough. Emily immediately found it strange that the priests seemed to be setting themselves up for failure. Only the prince remembered well from history that this was a normal practice for people. All this time, it remained a mystery to the heroine how Tristan discovered the appearance of the magicians. Even Werner confirmed that it was a difficult task, as the instruments did not always work, because dark magicians were essentially almost no different from ordinary people with mana. Only special magical items could confirm that dark magic was present somewhere. So Werner had no choice but to take the priests at their word. This meant that the prince could not yet take decisive action without evidence. The whole situation made it easier for the heroine, who needed to hide her own powers. True, the girl did not expect that Balan's assistant had already discovered dark magic in the forest. The place was familiar to Emily, as it was there that she resurrected her loved ones after the accident. Of course, the lady had no intention of admitting to anything like that, as it would have sent her to prison. Miss barely managed to pretend that she was simply surprised by the proximity of dark forces to the imperial palace. But Werner was pleased with this circumstance, because his investigation was only made easier. Since childhood, the boy was burning with the desire to deal with dark magicians once and for all. So recently, he personally explored that area, and the instruments confirmed the presence of dark magic. That's why the prince wanted to send Emily into the forest, because she could sense the presence of dark forces. The only problem was that the girl herself had no desire to return to the scene of the accident. However, in this situation, the miss was a subordinate person, since she could not contradict the prince. So the heroine had to return home in a dejected mood, because she hadn't come up with anything. By the end of the working day, Emily's strength had finally left her, as so much had fallen on her. However, the girl did not regret anything, since she could not imagine her life without her loved ones. She was only worried that the bodies of Yulia, Isak, and Edmund could fall apart at any moment. That's why Emily needed help from the demon, because only he knew the basics of dark magic. Leo had so far successfully pretended that he was the Walker family's normal, sweet house cat. But in fact, the demon had long been thirsty for action and blood, although the heroine did not give it to him. For this reason, he became interested in her request for training, as he always loved admiration from others. Emily's interest in dark magic appealed to the cat, as he was an expert in it. The heroine was interested in whether it would be possible to strengthen the bodies of her loved ones so that they would not fall apart. At this question, a sly expression flashed on the cat's face, who knew the answer perfectly well. He took pleasure in scaring the lady by telling her that human corpses were needed to stabilize the zombies. Only a recently deceased man was able to help those who were called by dark magic. Of course, the heroine did not support this method, which frightened her to the very depths of her soul. But Leo didn't know any other way to further strengthen the zombies' bodies. Only after some time will the girl be able to do without rituals if she develops her dark powers. Since childhood, she had a natural talent for magic, but she never used it. In general, each dark magic developed along its own path, and it was only necessary to find its essence. Until then, the girl had to make sacrifices to support the bodies of her loved ones, and Leo personally preferred the second option, since he loved everything connected with blood and pain. However, he was not against helping Emily at least begin to try to study her essence. This is how it all led to the heroine being exhausted the next morning, even before the trip. Her condition did not escape Werner's notice, but the boy always remained tactful in such situations. Therefore, no one bothered the lady the whole time on the way, for which she was grateful to her companions. The girl was so tired that she didn't notice how the prince was watching her closely all the time. Throughout the night, Leo squeezed everything he could out of Emily to make her feel the flow of magic, and misunderstood that this was only the beginning of her difficult and complex path in learning the magical arts. Until then, she had to be careful even with Werner, who had been inquisitive from birth. As soon as they arrived at the place, the heroine immediately found it suspicious and strange. The prince had no doubt that someone was trying to hide the traces of dark energy. There was devastation all around, but for some reason, there were no bodies or any traces of recent death left. What bothered Tristan most was that someone had managed to pull off something like this behind his back. That's why he needed Emily, in whom he noticed the ability to recognize magic. True, the heroine had no idea what exactly she should say in such a confusing situation. Luckily for the girl, this time she didn't have to say anything, as Balan noticed the danger. Werner also felt the gaze from the outside, because he was one of the prince's best defenders. Some dark figures were peering out from the forest, and their intentions were clearly not friendly. But the assistant was confident in his abilities, although there were clearly more than 10 of those unknown people. Tristan trusted his assistant completely, so all he had to do was take care of the lady. So they hid together in the carriage to protect the girl's psyche from the bloody spectacle. Only Emily was worried in this situation, as she was afraid for Werner's condition. But the prince was confident that the knight would cope with it easily, since he had trained a lot for this. What bothered him most was that there was a data leak somewhere, and they tried to eliminate him. From childhood, Tristan was targeted by aristocrats, as he was the only son of the ruler, so no one had any questions about who exactly would inherit the throne in the future. However, the relationship with the prince's mother still left much to be desired, since she was a visitor. That is why there were dissatisfied people who considered the heir unworthy of his fate. Soon everything became quiet outside the carriage, so the prince concluded that they could get out. But the heroine was truly unprepared for the bloody spectacle that remained after Werner's battle. The assistant delicately covered the girl's eyes, but this did not rid her of the lingering smell of death. The only thing that upset the prince in this situation was that the knight was unable to leave at least one living person. This is all because before losing, every striker deliberately killed himself in front of Werner. So the assistant found solace in helping Emily cope with her emotions. Since they had nothing to do at the crime scene, the guy tried to take the girl away. But as soon as the initial fear dissolved, disturbing thoughts visited the heroine's mind. These corpses were so fresh and inviting that they were perfect for a magical ritual. So Emily simply felt sorry to leave such good resources for the restoration of her family's bodies. But next to the prince and his assistant, the girl had no right to touch the corpses in any way. She was lucky that Werner attributed the girl's pensive state to shock from what she had seen. The assistant even defended the lady in front of the prince, who demanded answers about dark magic. Tristan rarely took into account other people's feelings and emotions when it came to important matters. So Emily had to quickly come up with what exactly to say to the heir in response to his question. What she was most afraid of was that Beland would quickly realize that the girl was actually lying to him. The heroine's voice trembled slightly as she admitted the absence of dark energy. Until the very end, the lady did not know whether her answer coincided with the thoughts of the prince, who had already drawn his conclusions. And it turned out that the guy initially suspected that they were simply trying to lure him into a trap. Only the assistant was unable to understand why his master had come to such a dangerous opinion. The whole point was that the prince immediately noticed the sacred marks that were left on the bodies. Their peculiarity was that they belonged to the church and disappeared soon after death. So, in just a couple of minutes, the heir will have no evidence to support his version. That's why it was so important that Werner at least recorded everything with his own eyes, since the heir would still not be able to present anything to the church for acting so cunningly. Only Emily was interested in what would happen to the bodies of the recently killed enemies. And for this occasion, Werner always carried a shovel with him, because the prince was attacked quite often. No matter how sorry the girl was to lose good bodies for sacrifice, she remained silent, since the lady could not under any circumstances reveal her interest in this matter. But not everything was so bad in her case, because in the Empire, there were not only light forces. If there are good and honest people, then in contrast to them, there will always be bad and evil ones. The Empire was no exception, as underground organizations developed quite quickly within it. Many aristocrats supported such guilds because they liked to make easy money. In a short period of time, it was possible to secretly enrich oneself by many millions anywhere in the Empire. And this entire secret market was owned by just one man, whom everyone called by the nickname Donald. Since he received many requests, he set up a security system in the form of a secretary in advance. But today, the assistant upset the gentleman by saying that some man came to them without an appointment. In normal times, Donald would never have sacrificed his vacation for another deal. But as soon as he caught a glimpse of the uninvited guest's clothes, the guy quickly changed his mind. This is because the Walker family was hiding under their expensive coats, and their money was immediately noticeable. That's why the dark market owner quickly changed his mind, as deals with aristocrats were profitable. One could only be amazed at how two-faced and greedy this man was. A few hours ago, the heroine asked her older brother to find corpses for them. The guy had a lot of connections due to his status as a duke, so he could easily help in this situation. Therefore, the girl stopped regretting that she had recently turned down a good opportunity for the ritual. Under the cover of Duke Walker, it was almost unrecognizable because he knew how to control his emotions. Edmund had something with him that could radically change all trade relations with Donald. This is all because his predecessor once received a symbol of omnipotence from the owner of a secret market. As the current ruler of this place, Donald immediately recognized such a rare material for cooperation. Since childhood, he had heard that his ancestor patronized some influential families, but information about them has long been hidden in the darkness, among various unpleasant crimes. That is why the merchant could not even imagine that he would ever see such an influential person in person. In the current situation, Donald was forced to cover any needs of the Duke for free. But the question Edmund came with was too different from the usual business of a merchant. Never before had Donald heard anyone ask him to find the bodies of people who were already dead. Usually the guy was ordered to kill, so he wasn't able to carry out slightly different tasks. Although he owned a dark market, he tried to avoid anything that had to do with corpses. Now the guy had no choice, since his relative had given the trade symbol to this family. Besides, the sword near Donald's throat motivated him to work even more than the material he had brought. So the merchant quickly had no choice but to agree to this strange deal. This is how Walker quickly ensured that the problem with the corpses was quickly resolved. Although Emily was not sure that this man could be trusted, she had become accustomed to trusting her brother. Besides, the heroine still couldn't personally search for the corpses, because that would have exposed her. The adventures of the brother and sister did not end there, because the Duke led the lady down some other paths. While he had the chance, Edmund wanted to show Emily the beautiful roots of their hometown. And it came as a surprise to the lady that her brother knew about some of her secrets from him. Despite this, the Duke did not plan to put pressure on the girl, who had always lived a little apart from the family. He only hoped that the lady would eventually be able to confide in one of them to get support. Now that the whole family knew about Emily's powers, she no longer needed to hide from her loved ones. The heroine herself understood that much had changed in her relationships with her loved ones after their resurrection. Now the usually grumpy Edmund seemed to her like a hope, a protection, and a support in their difficult situation with dark magic. So, surprisingly easily, the guy got his sister to admit that she had been wrong all this time. Although, in reality, Edmund only wanted to hear that Emily would truly trust her family from now on. A sudden incident on the street interrupted a private conversation between brother and sister. The merchant quickly dealt with the situation, but the time for communication between Edmund and Emily was lost. The girl walked the city streets so rarely that she had no idea whether she should help in such situations. The easiest way for the heroine was to turn to her brother for advice, who had possessed amazing wisdom since childhood. But when Emily turned towards Edmund, she didn't find him there. She was surprised when her brother suddenly disappeared somewhere, although he had promised to take a walk together. For the first time in her life, the heroine found herself in a situation from which she could not find a way out on her own. But what most tensed the heroine was the fact that some stranger suddenly approached her. She immediately felt some strange aura emanating from the guy who was hiding his face under a cloak. Unfortunately for the girl, there was not a single person around who could interfere in her affairs. Because of her politeness, Emily could only smile awkwardly in response to the strange stranger's questions. For some reason, the guy only approached the lady, although this was unacceptable when communicating with aristocrats. What interested him most was the question of why the girl's loved ones suddenly appeared alive and well. An icy fear gripped the heroine's entire body when she realized that this man knew something about her family. At that moment, the girl couldn't get a word out because she didn't expect such a situation. Only the familiar voice of her brother pulled the lady out of the abyss of fear into which the strange stranger had plunged her. It turned out that the guy was there all this time, although for some reason the girl didn't notice him. But what surprised Miss most was that the young man did not notice any stranger talking to his sister. This incident left an unpleasant feeling inside the lady, who knew little about dark magic. It was not difficult to guess that the unknown man in the cloak also possessed these cursed powers. Edmund couldn't help but notice the worried expression on his sister's face, as if she was hiding something again. Despite her recent promises, Emily still did not tell her brother about what happened to her. Only with the smug Leo could the heroine be honest until the very end, because he knew the whole truth. Emily was deeply troubled by what happened to her because she was unable to protect herself. The cat could tell the girl a lot, since he was still closely connected to the depths of dark magic. That's why she told him about her worries about the strange guy she met today. The heroine was sure that he knew about her tragedy, although there were definitely no witnesses at the scene. Leo quickly came up with an answer, because powerful magicians knew how to easily hide their energy from others. So it was no surprise to the demon that no one but Emily saw that person. Only now did Leo admit that there were quite a few people in this empire who hid their power. And Emily was one of those people too, although she herself didn't even suspect that she had useful skills. It so happened that from childhood, the girl subconsciously hid her powers from everyone. And all this resulted in the fact that even in adulthood, Miss did not know how to control dark magic. No matter how much the cat grumbled at the heroine, she didn't care, as long as no one noticed the dark energy in her. So for a long time, the heroine did not plan to change anything in the current dead-end situation. Surprisingly, the very next day, Donald was able to please even the picky Isak. No one expected the dark market owner to complete his mission so quickly. Emily benefited from such efficiency, as the bodies of her loved ones were already in need of some work. Everyone in the family understood that they were doing something dangerous, but the zombies had no other choice. But only with the help of corpses could they, in theory, continue to maintain viability. No matter how skeptical Yuli was about this idea, she also wanted to live in peace. That is why the brothers and younger sister easily accepted the fact that real coffins stood in front of them. Only Emily could not remain calm in such a situation, since she was the only one left human. Out of excitement, the girl prepared everything possible in advance to ensure that her first ritual would go smoothly. Since Isak's body was in the worst condition, Emily decided to conduct her experiment on him. The brother was not averse to acting as a victim in the event that something suddenly went wrong. But the heroine hoped that she would cope the first time, and that they would not have any more problems. As soon as she began to chant the spell, the atmosphere in the room instantly changed. But the girl had no time to pay attention to this, because she was focused on the right words. The powerful surge of dark magic nearly knocked Isak off his feet, but he was able to heroically stand firm. The oppressive energy penetrated the dead bodies as soon as it appeared in the room after the words of the ritual. Literally, a few seconds later, she rushed towards Isak, who was barely containing the fear within himself. No one knew exactly what would happen after Emily finished casting the ritual spell, but the powerful dark energy raised such a strong squall in the room that objects flew to the sides. The heroine was most afraid that something would go wrong in the process, and she would harm her brother. So the girl's heart beat anxiously the entire time the energy remained in the room. But soon, her influence finally dissipated, and the miss was able to see the face of young Isak. The guy looked as if for the first time in his life, something had managed to surprise and frighten him so much. For some time the young man could not say a word, as he got used to the new feeling inside him. In the end, he admitted with surprise that he now felt himself filled with unknown forces. All the power that fell upon the young man in one moment still did not fit into his head. At the same time, Isak was absolutely sure that his sister's ritual worked perfectly on his entire body. True, it was still unclear whether this condition would cause any consequences for the zombie's body. For this reason, Edmund wisely suggested holding off on improving his body as well as with Julia's help. Who would have thought that even for such a case, the Duke would have his own large-scale plan? Although Edmund had intended to use the created basement for other purposes, he did not regret it. The escape room was just the right temperature to store dead bodies. But what surprised his relatives most was that the Duke had thought of access to the basement from any room in the estate, so the family shouldn't have had any problems transporting the coffins. At the sight of such a grandiose preparation, everyone was speechless, because the Duke had surpassed himself. Unlike Edmund, Isak could only boast of strength, so he took on the duty of carrying the corpses. But the guy still had poor control over his body, so the first coffin soon fell to the ground with him. Yuli was not prepared for such a sight, so she immediately gave in to panic at the sight of dead bodies. And only the heroine noticed something strange on the corpses, which attracted her attention with horror. The girl was ready to swear that she had seen these guys lying in coffins somewhere before, and the marks left by the priests on their necks confirmed the young heroine's worst fears. She remembered well Tristan's words, that he immediately noticed these marks on the dead who tried to attack him. So soon the Walker family turned to Donald for an explanation, as he had found these bodies for them. To everyone's horror, the merchant actually dug them out of the forest, unaware of the possible consequences. Even Isak understood how much trouble Donald's actions could cause their family. In such a situation, Edmund could do nothing to help Emily, who might be suspected. Yuli was the first to give in to the panic that overwhelmed her after realizing the entire unpleasant situation. Unlike the younger sister, everyone else had enough courage to maintain at least some calm. Edmund was most worried about Emily, because she was the one who was near those bodies in the forest. The Duke's powers were not enough to save his sister from the prince's close attention. But the heroine wasn't worried about this at all, because she always knew how to get out of difficult situations. Only talking to Jamie during work hours was able to distract Emily from all the bad thoughts. The young aristocrat was always interested in how her friend and colleague were doing. But most of all, Jamie loved to tell rumors and gossip, which she easily obtained from everywhere. So, the girl recently learned that some important priest was being sent to them from the main temple. But the temple rarely showed any interest in the affairs of the imperial palace, trying to keep itself aloof. So this news seriously alarmed the heroine, who did not know the plans of the powerful priests. Miss could make many guesses, but Jamie did not confirm anything due to lack of information. The girls stopped talking only when the prince finally arrived at his workplace. Tristan looked pleased that his employees had started work early in the morning. Although the heir allowed himself to be late, he never forgave his loyal assistants for such things. What worried the lady most was that the prince had learned something about the bodies buried in the forest, so she was wary of the new documents that were chosen for her to check. Although Werner only reported new circumstances in the case, this did not console Miss. Throughout the day, only the assistant remained calm, as if nothing important had happened. Emily, however, felt like she was on tenterhooks, even though she hadn't yet been charged with any serious crimes. Until now, she had no idea why the heir had given her personal attention at dinner. As the girl suspected, Tristan quickly learned about the sale of the bodies they left in the forest. This circumstance confirmed Emily's worst fears about the prince's observation skills. It was clear to everyone that Werner would not blab about the heir's affairs, since he liked his work. That's why Belland had a logical question. Did Lady Walker tell anyone about the bodies? Only tears could save the heroine in such a situation, so she resorted to them without remorse. The heroine tried her best to convince Tristan that she knew nothing about the missing bodies. Werner, who was weak to women's tears, was the first to break down at the sight of such emotionality. The prince turned out to be a tougher nut to crack, but it was clear he was uncomfortable with the situation. Many professionals in this profession would envy our heroine's acting skills. For this reason, the girl had no doubt that the prince would eventually stop suspecting her. The guy really did quickly drop his menacing tone, as he felt sorry for his faithful assistant. The most helpful person to the lady at this moment was Werner, who always carried handkerchiefs with him for such occasions. For some reason, the knight had no doubt that Emily could truly be trusted. Only thanks to his support did the heroine finally get out of this unpleasant situation. But the sticky fear and anxiety did not leave the girl even when she found herself in the safety of her estate. Anxiety was eating Emily up from the inside, making her even more absent-minded and thoughtful. The young lady's condition did not escape the watchful eye of her faithful assistant, Riley. This maid had always possessed amazing wisdom, but even she could no longer be trusted with the lady's secrets. So she quickly noticed that Emily, for some reason, began to close herself off even from communicating with her. The heroine had no normal answers to the questions of her assistant, who did not know about her powers. But Riley was in no position to interrogate her beloved mistress any further. So soon she reported that Lady Walker would be visited by her childhood friend from the main church. The heroine received this news with alarm, since she tried to avoid any contact with the temple. But fate seemed to be deliberately laughing at the girl, sending her more difficulties. So, just a few days later, the lady was forced to receive that very priestess as a guest. Hazel Bissett was a very energetic girl, full of responsibility for people. So it was no surprise that she greeted her beloved friend with great enthusiasm. During their separation, the heroine even managed to lose the habit of being sociable with young Hazel Bissett. It turned out that the priestess had planned to visit their mutual friend, who had not responded to their letters. In fact, the priestess wasn't very offended by that lady, because she always thought only of herself. Besides, Emily wouldn't let her friend get bored anyway, since they hadn't walked together for a long time. For both girls, the time spent drinking tea ended up flying by excitingly and very unnoticed. Even though Hazel had a secret mission from the temple, she still told her friend everything. The heroine was surprised when she heard that the priestess was also sent to that very forest. Bissett herself had so much faith in Emily that she had no doubt that she could talk to her about anything. She had become accustomed to the fact that since childhood, only Lady Walker had been able to understand her character. But the heroine had secrets from her friend, which made her feel terrible. Meanwhile, the girl's entire family could barely breathe normally due to the presence of holy power. They had never been so close to priests before, after a recent death. Yuli felt Hazel's presence especially strongly, which made her feel terribly ill. If only Edmund and his sister had also gone through the ritual, things would have been much easier for them now. As a result, the Duke could not even calmly walk along the corridors of the estate where Bissett was. While they could help Emily by hiding, the relatives tried not to do anything. The boy and the girl didn't even suspect that Isak had fallen into some strange state at that time. Not everything was as easy and simple as the brother and sister, who were weakened, thought. Unlike them, the middle brother had plenty of strength to fight the holy power. He was overcome with emotion due to disgust towards those who devotedly served the divine manifestations. Having become a zombie, the boy turned into a child of evil, which is why he had such a hard time with all of God's messengers. While the heroine did not even suspect the trouble that had enveloped her beloved relatives, Hazel was the first to hear some suspicious noise from above, although Emily did not lead her to her loved ones. This made the priestess understand that they were not alone in the estate, and the Walkers had not met her. The lady came up with an excuse that it was her sister Yuli who was conducting such noisy experiments, while the girl herself prayed that nothing like this would happen again. But her prayers were not answered, for with the next noise, someone's hand appeared in the window. It was not difficult for the heroine to guess that some kind of trouble had occurred between her loved ones. And now, Miss had to do everything to ensure that Hazel did not notice anything suspicious. So Emily tried hard to get Bissett's attention, just so she wouldn't turn around. The priest was pleased by the fact that her childhood friend now took her opinion into account. She had no idea that the heroine was only assenting in order to lower her guard. As soon as Hazel got to her feet and headed towards the window, the heroine jumped up after her. By any means necessary, the girl had to protect Bissett from what was outside the window. That's why she even invited Bissett into her room, even though that also carried danger. But at this moment, Emily was ready to do anything, just to continue to keep the family secret. The girl grabbed her friend's hand tightly, hoping that she would not resist any further. But in the end, something still caught Hazel's attention, who loved safety. This time, all the arguments about it being Yuli with the books making the noise didn't work for the heroine. Miss realized too late that Bissett was too responsible to leave things like that. The priestess was absolutely certain that the noises in the estate were not only made by her friend's sister, and Emily no longer had a single word that could stop her friend. That's why the heroine prepared herself for the worst, because she had no idea what the brothers were doing. The reality was even worse than the wildest expectations of the girl who feared for her relatives. Seeing the two boys hugging, Hazel immediately slammed the door due to the overwhelming embarrassment. Bissett was clearly not prepared for such a relationship to develop between Isak and Edmund. At that moment, the heroine thanked all the gods for such a convenient misunderstanding on Hazel's part. Now the priestess was so embarrassed that she forgot all her suspicions about Emily, and the girl could only play along with all the thoughts that were developing in her friend's head. In the end, even Edmund carefully confirmed that it was better not to touch him and his brother at that moment. This is how the hospitality of the Walker family, whom Hazel had previously loved very much, ended in a strange way. As soon as Bisset left, Emily learned that Isak had been tied up for some very urgent reason. The heroine could not have imagined that the consequences would come so unexpectedly for her brother. It turned out that Edmund and Yulia had to try to restrain the enraged guy for a long time. What frightened the heroine most was that Isak persistently tried to get to the young priestess, but as soon as the girl touched her brother, he immediately blossomed into a sweet smile. This circumstance greatly surprised Yulia, who had been particularly active in fighting with her brother. Only Leo knew that those close to her had become familiars for Emily and obeyed only her. Although the lady did not need protection from Saint Hazel, the guy's subconscious decided otherwise. The cunning demon did not tell the girl about such complications in advance, and that is how the problems arose. Because the heroine's loved ones were zombies, they reacted so actively to the holy power. For the sake of her relatives' peace of mind, the lady kept silent about the fact that they had become her familiars. It was a clever move on the girl's part, since only she understood the words of her demon. Emily deliberately took such a dangerous step just so that no one else would worry. After the relatives became zombies, they already had more problems to think about. In the end, Yuli was the most tired of all because of this situation, as her body became very weak. The girl quickly realized that Hazel had misinterpreted the situation with her brothers. The lady was by nature the most impudent and cheerful, so everything that happened made her laugh a lot. After the stress she had experienced, Yuli could no longer contain the laughter that had been bursting from the depths of her consciousness for a long time. But literally, a few minutes later, the girl had to stop as their brother returned. No one expected Andrea to come home so early from the school he had always liked. It was clear to Emily that the boy should never have been shown Isak in his condition. But the future heir of the Walker family first of all went to his beloved family. So, in a couple of minutes, the adults had to hide their brother, who still hadn't come to his senses. In his room, the boy continued to growl quietly as he was still immobilized. But at that moment, Andrea was so focused on his own problems that he didn't notice Isak's absence. It came as a surprise to everyone that the little one didn't want to talk about school. Even Julia enjoyed hearing about Andrea's stories, although she wasn't very fond of this kind of teaching. What can we say about the attitude of the heroine, who resurrected everyone else for the sake of her brother? And as a result, as the boy grew older, for some reason he began to close himself off from his family, as if his problems could not be solved. Only Leo did not attach any importance to what was happening, since he did not care. While the adults couldn't get the thought out of their heads that something had happened to the younger one, they could all only guess what exactly had happened to Andrea during her training. But all the theories were too far from the truth, which only young Emily understood. Eventually, Edmund was the first to stop guessing about what had actually happened. This is all because their family was recently sent an invitation to a real Parents' Day. This event has always been important for all students, as it influenced their status in society. Previously, Yuli missed such meetings, as she spent all her time experimenting. But the situation with Isak showed that the girl could also lose her mind at any moment. Of course, with time, Emily would have coped with any problems, but not immediately. That's why this time, Yuli couldn't afford to miss the parents' meeting. True, the family will have to leave Isak at home in case he suddenly does something else. But this was the least of her problems, because the heroine had to get a day off from the prince. Tristan was immediately interested in the girl's request, as he had rejected her desire to go on vacation. Even the usually stern heir understood that it would be too cruel to deprive the lady of even a day off. What Emily didn't expect was that Belland would want to send her to the meeting with her, but Tristan already had some suspicions about the school, and now there was a chance to test them. And the heir didn't care that even on her legal day off, Emily would continue to work. The lady herself was afraid that there really would be traces of dark energy in her beloved brother's school. The long-awaited Parents' Day soon arrived, but the lady was no longer so happy about it. She understood perfectly well that she would immediately attract all the curious glances of the aristocrats. This is because few people were able to accompany the prince to such events. The girl tried her best to ignore all the gossip that was already flying around them. But her heart was not so stable, so evil words still penetrated it. Once again, the miss was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the prince's attentive gaze on her. To avoid causing any rumors, Emily made a special trip away from her family. Who would have thought that this would be the very thing that would make Tristan worry about his assistant? What surprised Miss most was that Balan showed a sudden concern for her that she had not expected. Emily thought she wouldn't be able to see her brother today, but the prince wanted to go to his class right away. So the heroine was left with a lot of questions because of such behavior of the heir to the throne. Even Werner noted that Tristan was surprisingly attentive and caring today. But at that moment, the heroine was only concerned with everything connected with her beloved younger brother. Andrea greeted his older sister with a joyful smile as he was eagerly awaiting her arrival. This time, he wasn't even embarrassed by the fact that the girl came to the meeting in the company of the crown prince. Emily immediately noticed that her brother communicated well with his peers. The boys were happy to support Walker's heir, whose character they liked. What pleased the heroine most was that among the girls there was one to whom Andrea paid attention. But the girl's good mood was constantly spoiled by the prince, who pestered her with questions. Right now, Tristan was wondering if there were traces of dark magic anywhere nearby. Personally, the heroine did not believe that their enemies could really be in such a place. But the girl's self-confidence instantly disappeared when she actually felt dark magic. From the look on Emily's face, Tristan immediately realized that his worst fears had been confirmed. The lady herself could not believe that the school had been under threat all this time. Only Baland was able to remain calm in a situation for which he had mentally prepared himself in advance, while Werner had no idea what to do in such a difficult and dangerous moment. Emily felt for sure that the dark energy was somewhere deep underground, right below them, and no amount of helpers' shovels could have dealt with this situation, so it was all in vain. Everything would have been fine if the lady had not suddenly felt the approach of that very energy. Tristan at this point sadly assumed that the signal was gradually moving away from them. But in reality, Emily felt him rapidly approaching their place. More than anything in the world, the girl feared for the life of Andrea, who was the only remaining heir. That's why she rushed to her brother, despite the fact that she herself could have been seriously hurt. Only at the very last moment did the lady manage to grab the younger one, and then an explosion was heard in the school. Emily wasn't able to completely protect herself from harm, but she did help Andrea a lot. At that moment, due to stress and anxiety, she didn't even feel pain, despite the wounds all over her body. The girl was glad to see that the boy was okay, and he even found the strength to worry about others. Andrea's tear-stained eyes showed how much he loved his family, and how afraid he was of losing them. Next to him, the heroine every time understood how important it was to be a support and a pillar. That's why the girl ordered her brother to hide while she looked for the rest of their family. Emily was well aware that she would not be able to escape dark magic so easily. For the first time in her life, she encountered a creature that was a concentration of dark energy. The beast clearly didn't look like anything friendly, so the lady was faced with nothing but a fight. Whatever happened now, the heroine did not plan to retreat even under threat of death. Behind her was little Andrea, and Emily couldn't let him die so early. At this moment, the lady noticed that it was not only her brother who had been under threat all this time. Layla Archmanet was so frightened by what was happening that she did not find the strength to hide, and the beast immediately sensed such easy prey, which was a tasty morsel for him. His cruelty and determination proved that Emily was facing a real monster. Only thanks to physical training did the girl manage to save the girl right in front of the beast's nose. She noticed in time that Andrea had just found a good place to hide. It was to him that the lady carried Layla, who could barely speak because of the horror she had experienced. Now the boy could take care of the girl he had secretly liked for a long time. As much as the heroine didn't want it, she couldn't stay near the children who were in danger. Her duty as an adult was to protect her brother and all the other children he cared about. Emily had no hope that she could defeat the beast with her meager powers. She could clearly sense how strong the magic that was concentrated in the monster was. So the girl voluntarily became bait, just so that no one else would get hurt. Emily had never been so close to such dangerous and formidable creatures before. To the girl's surprise, the beast for some reason did not tear her to pieces on the spot, as she initially thought. Moreover, the monster suddenly showed signs of affection towards the lady, whom he saw for the first time in his life. At exactly that moment, another identical monster fell dead from a powerful attack from the side. The whole point was that Tristan did not stand idle, while the entire school was shaken by the attack of dark magic. But the lady was not even impressed by this, since she immediately noticed the heir's weapon. In his hands was a well-known sword for fighting evil, which was passed down from generation to generation. The death of one of the monsters clearly angered the second, as it was not part of his plans. The beast growled so menacingly, looking at the prince, as if he wanted to tear him into pieces with just one glance. But the monster acted surprisingly wisely, since he ran away from the heir and not towards him. Unfortunately, at that very moment, Yulia and Edmund ran into the room, as they were worried about Andrea. Tristan realized too late that he had accidentally put his acquaintances in danger by not killing the beast, and now the monster was rushing at full speed towards new victims who were still within its grasp. The boy and girl clearly did not expect that the danger would be so close to them. They could only huddle together in panic, as they would not have been able to escape anyway. The heroine didn't even have time to really understand what exactly had happened, since the beast didn't harm her. While Emily was trying to figure out the situation, the heir had already dealt with the last beast. Tristan wasn't even really tired, as his sword was doing all the heavy lifting and dealing damage. In the end, everything ended well. Despite all the fears and anxieties of young Andrea, Emily reached her younger brother first, as she was worried about his current condition. The girl was glad that in the end nothing happened to the boy, but she was already thinking about the worst. Even with Yulia and Edmund, everything was fine, although they almost became snacks for the dark beast. Lady Walker was once again convinced that she had always been unlucky with elections throughout her life. For the first time in a long time, Miss came to school and immediately found herself in such unpleasant circumstances. Everyone around was wondering who would want to attack small children. Even the heir to the throne had no answers. Despite having many useful sources, Tristan was sure of one thing: no one would just attack a school during the day. So the heir concluded that this assassination attempt was organized against the entire Walker family. In fact, few of this kind were afraid, since they all already knew about the attacks. But what came as a surprise to Belland was that the Walkers had initially suspected this possibility. Edmund was the first to suggest that their family was the envy of many among the aristocrats. But for some reason, Tristan didn't believe that it was all really just a matter of envy. It turned out that the heir had long been preparing the materials on which he relied in the investigation. That's why he knew about the rich aristocrats who had been brutally murdered not long ago. And it didn't matter at all how much money and power was under the control of the deceased people. The most terrible thing was that even among the Empire, there were already deaths, like in that very forest where the Walkers died. Tristan was frightened by the fact that all these people were descendants of those who sealed the dark magicians on the island. It was clear that those aristocrats did not die without reason, because there were too many deaths at once. It turned out that there was some group of people who tried to sacrifice the aristocrats. This is precisely what Lady Emily was investigating at the recent behest of the prince, who had become concerned. What Miss feared most was that the heir would decide to use their family as bait. But suddenly, Tristan declared that he would personally protect everyone in the famous Walker family. It was expected that the zombies were not pleased with such a broad gesture from the heir to the throne. Edmund understood perfectly well how dangerous it would be for them if Belanda lived on the estate. But the prince was not one of those who changed his mind so easily after making a decision. Tristan was willing to live in a completely simple room, just to protect the entire Walker family. That was why his wish was no longer discussed, and all Edmund's words were useless. The relatives finally realized how much they had been hurt by the prince's arrival. If Belland learns that there are zombies among the Walkers, their entire family will suffer greatly. So that same evening, the whole family gathered for an emergency meeting about what had happened. Isak was sad only because his loved ones were attacked while he was still at the estate. It still remained a mystery to everyone why those monsters didn't touch Emily. The heroine herself believed that the monster simply did not recognize the scent of Yulia and Edmund as its own. But all this did not change the fact that the younger sister would hardly be able to behave normally around the prince. The girl's only hope was that Isak knew at least something about the heir's thoughts and desires. But the guy didn't know anything, despite the fact that he was the commander of the knights. Tristan has always remained a calm and emotionless person who is difficult to understand. Only Werner knew how to guess the master's thoughts, and that's why he was always by his side. Although the heroine had been closely observing Belland recently, she too was left without any clues. The girl couldn't even imagine that Tristan would be so eager to investigate the case. What angered Isak most about this situation was that someone dared to attack their younger brother. Edmund understood that even their own deaths were not accidental in light of recent events. There was a feeling that someone was fighting against the inheritance of power in famous and powerful families. And this meant that soon those people might come for Emily, who had recently become a dark magician. Only Isak did not understand the seriousness of this situation, which caused displeasure on the part of the Duke. The middle brother was always a bit of a fool when it came to important matters in their family. But Emily was sure that the dark magicians were still sealed on the island. But Yulia had a hunch that one of them might well have escaped into the open world of the Empire. One of the dark magicians was quite capable of controlling those terrible monsters. But the catch was that the priests also knew how to manipulate dark monsters. And it was not entirely clear who exactly was attacking aristocratic families throughout the Empire. What Yuli feared most was that even the prince would not be able to protect them from unknown enemies. The Duke was the first to come up with secret symbols, so that they could communicate even in Tristan's presence. This was necessary in order to personally protect the estate from the heir and the alleged killers. So when Belland finally visited the Walker estate, they were completely prepared for it. Tristan hadn't even expected such a warm welcome from the family he had volunteered to protect. But the Duke insisted on good treatment as a sign of gratitude and appreciation for his help. It was not without reason that Edmund called only certain assistants to set the table. With this, he conveyed a message to the family that they must urgently meet that evening without the prince. While everyone around him was distracted, Tristan continued to think about his own things, because he didn't come here for nothing. And finally, the prince was the first to ask whether the Walker family could repel monsters with their powers. Edmund was most frightened by this assumption, because he remembered Emily's awakening. But there was no danger, since the prince did not know about the dark powers of his faithful assistant. In a panic, the Duke signaled for someone close to him to distract the crown prince, and Yuli took charge of everything, screaming loudly that she saw a dark figure outside the window. Even small children could tell that the girl was just pretending. But suddenly, the prince took Lady Walker's words seriously, as he himself was worried about the attack. The heroine still couldn't understand whether the heir was really as stupid as he tried to appear. It turned out that Tristan actually believed that someone would try to attack the Walkers. No one told the prince that this attack had already happened several days ago. So the heir continued to make attempts to strengthen unnecessary security. Edmund had no choice but to follow Trisitana's orders in this direction. But all this did not help to distract Belland, because he returned to the topic of dark monsters. During the attack at school, it seemed to him that the animals, for some reason, avoided Lady Emily. The heroine could think of nothing else to do but to appeal to pity because of her weak strength. Tristan always remained a gentleman, so he tried not to offend the girls with his words. Thanks to Emily's efforts, the prince stopped suspecting the Walker family of helping those monsters, and the girl was able to breathe a sigh of relief because her acting had once again helped them. The lady did not forget that compliments were always pleasant to people, even if they rejected them, and suddenly, Tristan succumbed to Emily's kind words about him being a good person. Who would have thought that the prince would actually be embarrassed after just one praise? But in the end, Belland admitted that he had never treated anyone else with the same care and attention. Only the heroine understood how dangerous such confessions from the heir were. During her conversation with him, she noticed that the guy always spoke directly what he thought. And because of this, many people thought he was stupid and simple-minded, although in fact, he was coping with his duties. Emily was only worried about how her family would take such strange words from the prince. And Isak was the first to express his opinion. Under the pretext that he was supposedly angry from hunger, he took out his undeserved anger on the butler, just so as not to say anything to the heir to the throne. Only after the food was brought did Tristan finally forget about all the important conversations at the table. But nothing ended for Emily, who suddenly noticed the menacing looks of her family. Even Yuli incinerated the girl, although she was usually always on her side in such moments. All the Walkers were lucky, and Belland didn't notice that they were exchanging glances at each other. As a result, immediately after eating, Yuli was the first to ask Emily about her relationship with the prince. The girl was very worried about the fact that her sister looked too nice with Tristan, but the heroine herself firmly believed that they remained within the bounds of the boss and his faithful employee. But Yuli still couldn't forgive the fact that her sister complimented the heir. Emily knew perfectly well that her brilliant sister would not be able to understand why she did this. Only the heroine had to resort to flattery her entire life in order to achieve anything. In fact, Yuli started this whole conversation only because she was sincerely worried about her sister. She was confused by the fact that her relative treated a stranger with kindness. After the girl became a zombie, her emotions constantly fluctuated sharply throughout the day. And now another hysteria has happened, which Yuli has not yet learned to cope with. While they were talking, Emily noticed the crown prince approaching, which was dangerous for them. So the girl tried to give her sister a sign to start controlling her behavior. But in this state, Yuli perceived the offer of a walk as an ordinary matter, and not a secret symbol. She sadly admitted that she had been feeling unwell lately due to lack of communication. Only at this moment did the heroine turn to Tristan, in panic, to inform her sister of his approach. It turned out that the guy was making a short tour of the estate because he wanted to check everything. This time, Balan didn't even take security with him, as he was tired of their close attention. So Emily had a hard time choosing her words, trying to send the heir away as far as possible. She immediately reminded the gentleman that they would have to arrive to work in different carriages. All this time, the guy didn't think about the fact that their living together could cause a lot of gossip. This time, the prince was attentive, so he noticed that Emily stepped on Julia's foot. All this time, the lady did not even feel anything like this, since her sensations of pain were dulled. And now she had to panic and come up with an excuse, and she invented some kind of illness. Personally, the heir had never heard of anyone being constantly drawn to dancing throughout the day. This excuse was the worst one the heroine's sister could have come up with. In this situation, Emily didn't even have any arguments to stop them from seeming strange. Yuli herself understood perfectly well how stupid she had come up with something to justify herself. Her words aroused suspicion in Tristan, who had never heard of such a disease before. The heroine was horrified by this whole situation, because the heir to the throne could not be called a fool. But in the end, Miss quickly came up with an excuse for her sister, pretending that she had always been so passionate. According to Emily's legend, Julia now liked dancing, so she practiced it in any free time. This explanation satisfied Tristan, although it was also far from normal assumptions. Yuli was truly obsessed with alchemy since childhood, and could spend days on end doing it. And so her relatives came up with a new hobby for the girl, and she also became very involved in studying it. Tristan always encouraged people who, without hesitation, devoted themselves wholeheartedly to what they loved. This is how Yulia managed to receive praise from the heir himself, something the girl never expected to hear. But what impressed the lady most was that Baland had a task for her to make a potion. The thing is that after thoroughly searching the forest where people died, Tristan found an interesting book with recipes. She was left behind by a wizard who lived alone in the wilderness for many years. Belanda was upset that some of the forest keeper's records were lost, even though they were important. With the help of his connections, he could easily get all the necessary ingredients for Yulia's recipes. Naturally, Lady Walker was immediately delighted with this idea, as she had always loved alchemy. But the heroine could not allow this to happen, because her sister's body was not in a condition to perform magic. Tristan had hoped in advance that Yuli would not refuse him, because the matter was very important for the Empire. But Emily had to urgently shut the girl up so that she wouldn't agree to anything. The heroine came up with the excuse that for such an important matter, they needed to consult with their family. The girl could only hope that the prince's opinion would not change after their possible refusal. That same night, while most of the Walker estate was asleep, the heirs of the family gathered together in the basement. Isak laughed the loudest because of the strange excuse the girls had hastily come up with for the prince. Unlike his middle brother, Edmund tried to remain calm so as not to offend his sister. Yuli really blushed to the tips of her ears because she had to come up with such stupid legends. In fact, the heroine gathered everyone because their sister was not allowed to conduct alchemical research. The situation with Isak showed that they needed many more bodies to stabilize. Edmund was already doing everything he could to help his loved ones in such a difficult situation. But the heroine saw that her brother's efforts were not enough, since now not only human bodies were needed. To secure the effect for a long time, they needed the bones of a magical beast, which were scarce in the Empire. Even Isak understood how difficult the situation with their bodies was after the resurrection. To avoid arousing the prince's suspicions, Edmund advised Julia to accept his offer to do the research. The girl was immediately delighted by this, because she had long dreamed of working under Tristan's leadership. The Duke didn't just agree to such cooperation, because Yuli could have stumbled upon something important. Edmund didn't believe that the forest keeper had simply hidden the potion recipe from everyone for many years. The wise guy suspects that this hidden recipe could be useful to his family in the future. It was quite possible that the keeper was trying to hide something that belonged to the dark magicians. So now Isak had a chance that he would no longer give in to that unfounded rage. Yuli didn't care what her brothers wanted from her, as long as she could get down to research. The girl hadn't started doing her favorite thing for so long that her happiness at the moment knew no bounds. The next morning, the first thing Werner did was ask the prince why they had arrived in different carriages. Tristan was already used to the fact that many guys didn't realize how much this could cause rumors from the outside. Even his faithful assistant did not expect that the tongues of the aristocrats would be so vicious. During Emily's examinations, the knight had long since come to an opinion that differed from his master's thoughts. This was all because Werner thought it was stupid to try to find out if there was evil hiding behind Emily. The guy was surprised every time by how sweet and kind the girl always was next to them. So the assistant did not even think of suspecting the lady who always served his master faithfully. What impressed Werner most was how Emily bravely saved her little brother from the monster. For this reason, he desperately tried to convince the heir that the lady was a good person. But Tristan was interested in something completely different, because he discovered something in the documents. Biland noticed that the Walker family's carriage was brand new, and yet they had not announced the purchase. This discrepancy greatly bothered the prince, who believed that the family had something to hide from the others. And the heir was right, because after the resurrection, the Walkers really did have a lot of secrets. That is why the heroine had to hold all meetings with her family on deep and quiet nights. They had no other choice, as their loved ones did not want to be discovered by anyone else. Over the past few days, Edmund has been setting up a whole secret storage area for the family's corpses. All this gave hope that the next ritual would be enough for the zombies. But the heroine still felt uneasy, because she was afraid of being caught by the heir to the throne. A few days ago, Donald personally contacted the Duke, as he had found new information about his case. The merchant was very proud of himself, since it was only in his power to fulfill Walker's requests. Edmund never thanked the man in advance, no matter how much he bragged. It turned out that Donald had found a way to use a pile of bodies of recently executed prisoners. Crimes were being committed throughout the Empire, and the Emperor had been particularly strict in recent times. In theory, such bodies were burned almost immediately after the execution, so that there would be no mention of them, and the merchant planned to pretend to be a company that allegedly personally cremated the bodies of criminals. This news pleased Edmund, as it greatly increased his chances of getting good corpses. Moreover, the Empire was so vast that now the Walker family will always have supplies. Only the most cunning dark market trader had access to such massive mining operations. The Duke did not miss Emily's doubts, which were clearly written on her face. The older brother wanted the girl not to suffer from constant pangs of conscience. The heroine was forced to do all this not out of personal whim, but to help her beloved family. However, the lady could not help but think that they had all gone down the wrong path because of her. But it was too late to retreat, because the brothers and sister needed the girl's help. So the heroine threw all bad thoughts out of her head and concentrated on the ritual. Any mispronounced word could again lead to unpleasant consequences. That's why the girl tried so hard, just so that everything would be okay with the zombies in the future. While the Walker family was absent from the estate, the prince took advantage of this strange situation. The guy had long noticed that people from this family, for some reason, slept surprisingly little at night, while he couldn't sleep properly because of the noises they made all night. So today's silence suggested to the heir that everyone had gone somewhere secretly from him for a while. This only played into Tristan's hands, as he wanted to find some suspicious information. That's why he carefully made his way into the Duke's office, even though it was the wrong thing to do. However, no matter how much the guy searched, for some reason, there was practically nothing in the documents. This further alarmed the heir, who was already unable to shake off his suspicions. Tristan understood that such an opportunity might not present itself to him anytime soon. It was only at one wonderful moment that he clearly felt someone's intense gaze on him. The boy turned around in horror, as his instincts told him that he had been discovered. But it turned out that the Walker family's pet cat had wandered into the office and posed no danger. In fact, Leo did not like the search for Tristan, and he decided to distract the prince from this activity. The demon deliberately brought a maid after him to scare the heir out of the office, so Tristan had no choice but to escape through the nearest window. He had good physical condition, so this did not present any difficulty for him. The prince arrived just in time, as a second later, Riley peered into the Duke's office. The girl always tried to keep an eye on her pets when their owners were away. She didn't notice that Leo was frowning more than usual, since she didn't know how to read a cat's emotions. This is all because the demon was convinced of the danger of Tristan, who suspected the Walker family of something. The next morning, the maid was the first to speak about the Duke's study having been opened during the night. Even then, the assistant found this strange, since none of the owners were home. That's why Riley confessed everything to Emily, because this information could be important. For herself, the faithful servant was unable to find an explanation for the strange incident. The heroine listened to her assistant with gratitude, since she herself was worried about such cases. The lady had no doubt that Tristan had searched her brother's office that night. It was only thanks to the maid's vigilance that evidence was found so quickly in this matter. But it turned out that this was not all, because Riley had other news for the lady. She recently received a letter from one of the important aristocrats, intended for Emily. It was a message from Natalie Spencer, who had been a good friend of the heroine since childhood. The lady had managed to forget about her friend, since she had hardly responded lately. Not long ago, Natalie heard about Hazel's arrival, but she was never able to see her in person. That's why the girl planned to organize a banquet to which she invited all her friends. Emily immediately guessed that Spencer wanted her to take Bissette with her to this celebration. But what bothered Miss most was that Natalie had recently made a good acquaintance. Since the entire empire was filled with rumors about Emily and Tristan, Miss heard nothing. Previously, the heroine was confident that there were no more unknowns in aristocratic society. In the end, the lady gave Riley the task of sending a consent to Natalie's invitation. Suddenly, a loud sound throughout the estate distracted the heroine from her thoughts. Because everything should be quiet, the girl immediately jumped up from her seat in fear, as she could not imagine what had happened. The noise was coming from the office of Yulia, who had recently been allowed to conduct experiments. As soon as the heroine burst in there, she almost suffocated from the huge amount of smoke. In a panic, Emily tried until the last minute to find her sister, who was nowhere to be seen. But it turned out that the girl was okay, as the explosion did not cause any damage. Yuli just slightly miscalculated the reagents, which led to such a dangerous and noisy incident. Although in reality, she was a real genius, so nothing bad would have happened for sure. But the girl was pleased that her sister rushed as fast as she could to check on her condition. It turned out that the heroine wasn't the only one who was frightened by the sounds that were heard from the laboratory throughout the entire estate. Not long ago, the prince strengthened the guard, so the young knight Hurl quickly came to the rescue. The assistant was only glad that the girls had actually sorted everything out without him. This guy had heard a lot about Yulia's genius, so he tried not to interfere with her work. Naturally, such a loud burst of noise did not escape the notice of the other inhabitants of the estate. Tristan was the next to run into the lab, worried that an attack might have occurred. But the sisters quickly explained to the prince that there had been only a minor misunderstanding with the experiments. While the heir lived in the Walker estate, he tried to avoid official communication. So Yuli quickly got used to conversations with Belland, even though they had different statuses. As usual, the prince quickly settled all issues with the security, who performed their duties well. But the heroine almost immediately noticed that the young man still did not take his attentive gaze off her. For some reason, recently, the prince had become increasingly concerned about the safety of his faithful assistant. Although Tristan saw that everything was fine with the lady, he couldn't help but clarify for the sake of his conscience. Every time Emily felt the heir's attention on her, she felt uneasy about it. Miss tried to communicate with the prince only at work, but this was impossible while he lived nearby. This time, Tristan did not limit himself to words alone, as he handed the lady a beautiful dagger. The heroine immediately guessed that this thing was made to order, and Belland had given the dagger to her. Until now, the girl did not understand what exactly caused the prince's close attention to her. But what most perplexed the lady was the request of the heir, who wanted her not to be harmed. Emily had never been this close to guys before, especially ones with such a high status. Therefore, Miss was worried about what such unexpected care from Tristan could lead to. She was saved from embarrassment by the fact that Yuli began to complain about her difficult experiments. It turned out that most of the recipe had been lost, and the lady was trying to restore it at least a little. When it came to alchemy, Yulia's eyes burned with an incredibly joyful and lively fire. Seeing such a sight, the heroine felt a little envious of her sister, who was not a dark magician. Lady Walker was one of those people who was ready to talk endlessly about experiments and alchemy. For the first time, Tristan felt the hopelessness of being locked out of a conversation. At such moments, little could distract Julia, because she completely lost herself in excitement. Only Emily had the gift of calming her sister, which is what she did to save the heir to the throne. Tristan did not miss the fact that his faithful assistant was trying to protect him from long monologues. As a thank you, the guy smiled so warmly that the heroine's heart skipped a couple of beats. Emily had previously thought that they would have a lot of problems with the prince's arrival, but that didn't happen. If only the heroine knew what dangers were already awaiting her in the imperial palace. All because the priest had finally come to Tristan, and now he was eager to meet for an important matter. This time, the temple sent Saint Sion, whose magic was very destructive to all dark magicians. But the heroine had no idea how dangerous this man would be for her. At the request of her friend Natalie, she brought as many people as possible to her event for aristocrats. Emily even managed to persuade her younger brother to go to the banquet. Although only in Layla's presence, it was a great victory that the lady was able to rescue her beloved sister from the captivity of the laboratory. And now, Miss could take a long break from all the difficult and important tasks with a sense of accomplishment. But in her most relaxed moment, Natalie finally found a friend she hadn't seen for a long time. This girl tried to maintain good relationships with everyone, so she was always busy. But now, Spencer has been able to make time for the most important people who have supported her for a long time. All these days, the aristocrat wanted to introduce her childhood friend to her new interesting acquaintance. But for some reason, the girl suddenly disappeared from her field of vision at the most inopportune moment. As soon as the heroine heard the name of that unknown lady, she froze in place in horror. This is all because Natalie knew Penelope Swanson, whom Emily thought was long dead. Lady Walker remembered well how she personally attended the funeral of a young aristocrat. It happened last year, and many were sad for a long time about such a young loss. So Emily had no doubt that this whole story smelled of something strange. The best solution for the heroine was to personally figure out what was going on. Luckily for the girl, Natalie herself dreamed of introducing everyone around her to her wonderful friend. But first, Penelope had to be found somewhere at the banquet, which Spencer decided to do as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Tristan finally came out to the crowd, maintaining maximum grandeur in his eyes. The guy rarely attended such events, but today he couldn't refuse his friends. Everyone around eagerly awaited parting words from the heir they respected. This time, the guy's speech was short, although he tried to fill it with meaning and support. Many aristocrats watched with pleasure as Tristan grew up and became ready to rule. Emily also tried to be present at this celebration of life, but for some reason, she felt unwell. But recently, the girl hadn't even practiced dark magic because of the prince's proximity. The only thing that saved the heroine was the fresh air on one of the balconies of the large estate. It turned out that the lady wasn't the only one who tried to escape the spotlight at the event. Emily was glad to meet Tristan in a relaxed atmosphere, since they usually didn't have time to talk. While the girl constantly wanted to express her gratitude to the prince for his protection, Balan did not do this because he valued the Walker family, but he decided to keep silent about it. It was at this moment that the lady remembered that she had prepared a small gift for the heir to the throne. She had noticed more than once that he had a weakness for mint tea, so she bought it. The guy clearly didn't expect his faithful assistant to show so much attention to him, while for the heroine, such actions seemed normal for her job. But Tristan thought otherwise, because even Werner usually didn't pay attention to such trifles. As soon as the heir approached the girl, she, as she thought, forgot about everything else. Such close communication with the guy greatly embarrassed the lady, causing her to get lost in her own head. Once again, Baland reminded Walker that everyone around them continued to follow them, so the girl had to return to the main hall only when the main music changed. Until then, Tristan enjoyed the lady's emotions with a smile, which attracted his attention. The longer they remained in each other's company, the more embarrassed the heroine felt. Only when the music finally stopped was the girl able to free herself from the prince. Never before had Emily run away so quickly, as if something terrible was chasing her. But as soon as the lady returned to the hall, the unpleasant nausea attacked her with renewed vigor. Miss had just started feeling better, but suddenly all the painful effects became much stronger. The heroine didn't have a single guess on this matter, because she didn't know how to treat herself. Meanwhile, the bad feelings did not subside. as if something was forcing them to get stronger. But the priest Zion, who just happened to be passing by the young lady, could heal others. This guy accidentally noticed the girl, not suspecting that he himself became the cause of all her problems. As a true saint, Zion could not pass by a person who needed help. The closer the priest came, the more difficult it became for the heroine to breathe due to the presence of holy power. His assistant volunteered to help an unknown lady in distress so that the priest would not be distracted by anything. But Zion was used to sharing his power with anyone in need, even if there was no place for it. Only the priest Paulo was against this approach, since he respected the manifestations of holy power. The high priest did not share the opinion of his assistant, as he tried to help all the people around him. While they were arguing, the heroine didn't feel any better, but she still tried to show that everything was okay. The most important thing for the girl now was to refuse the saint's help, so as not to die completely. In the end, the priest really didn't help the lady yet, because he was in a great hurry. Despite her pale skin, Emily managed to maintain her composure so as not to arouse the priest's suspicions. Only when the priests left was the heroine finally able to feel much better. A little later, Zion became interested in the girl who refused his help. His assistant was able to recognize the young lady as the daughter of the Walker family, about whom they had heard good things. After meeting the girl, something bothered the priest, although he was not sure of his strange assumptions. Paolo did not notice anything strange about the girl, who was little different from the other aristocrats. But Zion was sure that for some reason, some strange energy was emanating from Emily. However, at the moment, it was much more important for him to meet the prince than to investigate this case. Meanwhile, it wasn't only Emily who felt uneasy about the priest's presence nearby. Yuli felt constantly unwell, although after her death, she had never been sick or tired. But for some reason, at this particular event, the girl could barely stand near the wall, trying not to talk to anyone. It turned out that it wasn't just his sister who was feeling ill, as Edmund was also out of his mind for some strange reason. It was clear to the boy and girl that they urgently needed to find Emily and Isak to find out about their condition. Ideally, Yulia would flee the event so that no one else would notice their incomprehensible weakness. The first thing the girl discovered was Isak, who was standing almost motionless right in the middle of a crowd of people. She was unable to reach her brother immediately, as all the aristocrats around him continued to move. As soon as Miss approached the guy, she realized that something was wrong with him again. As luck would have it, at that very moment, the appearance of a priest from the main temple in the empire at the banquet was announced. Yuli was instantly gripped by cold horror as she realized what was happening to Isak. Due to the presence of holy power nearby, the young man stopped thinking normally, trying to give himself away. To prevent this from happening, Yuli made urgent attempts to bring her sensitive brother to his senses. True, to do this she had to hit her brother several times, since his condition was too serious. In fact, the girl did not feel sorry for Isak at all at that moment, because he often laughed at her. As a result, all the lady's actions were so effective that the guy quickly came to his senses. Just like last time, he again couldn't say exactly what had happened to him recently. The only person the brother and sister could see was Edmund, but they could not stay any longer for the event. As soon as Yulia and Isak exchanged glances, they instantly came to a common opinion. Right now, they needed to leave the banquet as quickly as possible without being discovered. Unfortunately, they didn't manage to leave the premises in time before the priest arrived. Its power turned out to be so enormous that even Yuli was unable to resist this influence. The girl's entire body was seized by a terrible desire to tear the priest to pieces so that he would no longer exist. The heroine saw the entire state of her family from the outside, but could not intervene in any way. She understood that any delay would be disastrous for her loved ones, who were zombies. But Emily didn't have a single idea on how to save everyone from this event. The priest also got on her nerves a lot, since his magic opposed the dark forces, and now Emily was too weak to properly fight a priest of such magnitude. Therefore, Miss had no choice but to call on Leo to help her in her difficult task. The girl was sure that the demon had answers to any of her questions in dark magic, and she turned out to be right, although Leo was extremely unhappy that he was torn away from the warm and cozy estate. The cat was not a lamp that could fulfill all wishes, but he could certainly give the girl some good advice. True, Leo still couldn't personally help the owner sort out this difficult situation. He was just an animal in this world, so his capabilities remained limited. Only Emily had the ability to control the family, that became her familiars after her death. No matter how unpleasant this news was for the heroine, only orders to her family were salvation for them. It was nothing unusual for Leo that the lady could control those she had resurrected. But Emily was disgusted by the mere thought that she could instill something in her loved ones. But in this situation, the girl had no other choice, because everything was really bad. Even the usually reserved Edmund had already lost the last of the strength that had kept him from future madness. So Emily activated her powers as quickly as possible to stop her brothers and sister. Her magic immediately affected the zombies, who obeyed their mistress in everything. Only when the danger was eliminated was the girl able to breathe a sigh of relief and fall to the floor. This situation once again showed the heroine how weak she still was in the study of dark magic. But the next morning, the same troubles that haunted her in the Imperial Palace awaited Miss. The whole point was that the priest was trying to get an audience with the prince, although he was not registered. Emily almost immediately felt a pressing holy energy that was very contrary to her nature. The last thing the lady wanted in the world was to meet Zion literally the next day after the problems. The priest also remembered the girl well, and therefore dared to ask her for help in his important matter. But the miss did not want to help the priest, because she felt ill with any contact with him. No matter how much Zion begged the young lady, she was in no position to sincerely help him. Even the most charming glance in the world from the priest had little influence on Emily's opinion, because he was her opponent. Before finally giving in, the heroine made several more attempts with refusal. But the girl soon realized that the priest was not accustomed to someone not fulfilling his important requests. So it was easier for the lady to give Zion what he wanted than to continue to suffer in his holy company. Although the guards were clearly against this decision, Emily took full responsibility this time. On the way to the heir's office, she tried to stay as far away from the priest as possible so that she would feel better. In fact, deep down, the heroine hoped that the heir would almost immediately show Zion the door. Tristan hated it when someone interfered with his work schedule without permission. And the priest turned out to be just such a person who appeared in the office without asking. Emily was still amazed at how cheerful this young and handsome man was. It turned out that Zion secretly escaped from his assistant so that he would not interfere with his meeting with the prince. This was because the main church did not approve of any conversations with the heir without his invitation. This circumstance surprised the girl, who did not expect that even priests could break some rules. Usually the priest did not allow himself to behave like this, but his business was too important. For his sake, he even dared to interfere with Emily's work schedule. Although he treated her well, he looked forward to seeing Belland, hoping that the prince would not drive him away. As the heroine thought, Tristan was not happy that there were strangers in his office. Zion immediately tried to explain his position, because it was not without reason that he had broken some rules. But the heir did not even look in the direction of the offender, since he did not want to communicate with him. Even in his worst fears, the priest never thought that Tristan would be so evil. Belland immediately recommended that the priest send him an official request for a business meeting. It was the first time in her life that Emily had seen Tristan remain so cold and stern. It wasn't hard for the girl to guess that the prince was still afraid that someone was leaking his information. They spoke with the heir more than once about the fact that it was not only the Walker family that was in danger, so the heroine was not surprised by how sharply Tristan reacted to the appearance of the priest. Whatever the guy said, Belland didn't want to expose himself to unnecessary danger during work hours. Emily was completely supportive of Tristan because he was so protective of everyone around him. But as soon as Zion mentioned the information about dark magicians, everyone in the room changed their minds. It turned out that the priest was well aware that many of them had begun to act again. That was why Zion was so eager to work with the prince to defeat their longtime enemies. This news was so unexpected that there was silence in the room for a while. The heroine wasn't sure that she had the right to listen to information of such special importance now. But the prince did not fire his assistant, since he trusted her as much as he trusted the experienced Werner. It remained a mystery to everyone why Zion had told such dangerous information to the heir to the throne. It turned out that the guy was forced to act because the barrier on the island with the magicians was collapsing. Tristan always suspected that things could come to this, but he still found himself unprepared for the battle. The priests from the main temple did not have enough power, which is why Zion needed help. The only thing missing for the heroine to fail completely was for the priest to unite with the heir to the throne. But as if Emily's opinion could now influence the decisions of Tristan, who had long been interested in magicians. So it was no surprise that Beelunt now had real reasons for cooperation. Now, Tristan's only concern was how long the priest would remain in the city. Zion was so pleased that the prince had accepted him that he was ready to stay longer. It turned out, however, that the priest's time was limited, since today he had secretly escaped from his assistant. Werner was the first to learn that the priest Paolo had already been tearing apart the imperial palace in search of his master. No matter how sad Zion was, he was forced to say goodbye to the heir to the throne. Only Emily reacted tensely to the collaboration that had just emerged. But since the girl was acting as the prince's secretary, she had no right to object to him. As soon as Zion left Tristan's office, the guy plunged into deep thoughts. Because of this, he did not immediately notice that the heroine had thoughtfully brought that very mint tea for him. Lately, the lady has been trying to leave only a good impression on the prince. That's why she was so attentive to any changes in his face. Miss was one of those who stayed closest to the picky Tristan for quite a long time. That is why, over time, information about Belinda gradually came together to form a coherent picture. As time went on, the heroine began to understand the heir's emotional states better and better. She also had a good memory for the things he liked, although he never admitted it to anyone. And as a thank you, Miss received a sweet expression on Tristan's face, for which she was ready to fight. This time, the guy clearly didn't expect that the lady would have time to study all his habits so well. Of course, the girl had no intention of telling anyone exactly what she had found out. She didn't expect that her concern would cause strange emotions in Tristan, who rarely received such feelings. Even this time, the guy tried to hide the fact that he was embarrassed by Emily's attentiveness. The last few days have been so busy that the banquet organized by Natalie has already arrived. Spencer was so happy to meet Emily because she could finally introduce her friend to her. As soon as the heroine saw Penelope Swanson, she immediately recognized her as a dark magician. The Count's daughter herself strenuously pretended that she was in fact an ordinary person in the Empire. But the heroine definitely felt magic in her, the energy of which had recently been present in her as well. But Penelope herself didn't even notice that Emily also belonged to the forbidden dark magicians. The girls quickly brought Lady Walker to the common table, where many had already gathered. From the very beginning, Emily did not feel very comfortable in the company that was surrounded by Swanson's magic. All the young aristocrats behaved as if nothing unusual was happening around them. This led the heroine to the idea that Penelope had distorted the memories of everyone present. Otherwise, how could one explain how quickly each of the ladies got along with Lady Swanson? Natalie was ready to constantly talk only about the new friend she introduced Emily to. It was Spencer who told a lot of interesting things about Lady Walker to a recent good friend. All this only made the lady more tense, although she tried her best to smile at everyone around her. Natalie's behavior was very different from what the heroine had been accustomed to since childhood. Never before had the girl looked back so closely at someone she had only recently started communicating with. All the friendly atmosphere disappeared as soon as Miss asked how Natalie met Penelope. Suddenly, Spencer seemed to fall into a state where she couldn't control her actions. It was at this moment that Swanson finally revealed her true magical nature. The girl put Natalie into a state of hypnosis in order to once again change her upbringing. According to Penelope's legend, the girls accidentally spilled glasses of wine on each other at a banquet. The dark sorceress was confident that her magic worked perfectly on her subordinates. Only one heroine did not succumb to the suggestion, since she herself possessed dark energy, while Natalie good-naturedly stated that she had indeed somewhat forgotten the moment they met. Emily had to pretend that she believed every word her beloved friend said. This was all because Penelope had mind control, and this could have a tragic effect on the heroine. The girl understood that now she had too little strength to resist this type of magic. The most terrifying thing was that Swanson could make Lady Walker's disappearance go unnoticed by others. That is why Miss preferred to remain silent, under the contemptuous gaze of young Penelope. What surprised Emily most was that such a powerful magician had not yet been found within the powerful empire. This time, Lady Walker was saved only by the fact that Swanson wanted to finish the general tea party early. Although the sorceress did not explain anything, she used magic to make it so that no one would object to her. And Emily had to smile politely in response, although in reality, she was barely containing her horror. The lady was only able to relax when she hid from everyone inside her family carriage. The heroine had no idea that Penelope was much more dangerous than she could have imagined. all because the girl was constantly just pretending to be a good person in society. But in reality, she was terribly angered by the aristocrats who paid so much attention to traditions. Until now, she could only trust her faithful assistants, whom she herself created with magic. The most devoted among them was Herman, who was also endowed with good abilities. Penelope didn't hesitate to use the guy for any needs that came to her mind. Any other person in the servant's place would have long ago run away from the mistress, but Herman had no such thoughts. He didn't dare say a word to the girl who essentially created him with her magic. Such devotion as that of this assistant was truly difficult to find throughout the entire empire. The only problem was that Penelope did not value Herman, using him to achieve her own goals. Meanwhile, Emily was unaware that she had nevertheless attracted Swanson's attention at her tea party. As soon as the girl returned to the estate, Edmund suggested that she go to the auction. He prepared a disguise in advance, because items for dark magic would be sold in that place. Now, the heroine needed any information about her powers, so she couldn't miss something like this. So soon they all attended an auction together, to which not all aristocrats were invited. The heroine was grateful to her family for their support, because without them, she would never have decided to do something like this. This was far from the first time that older brothers helped their beloved sister so well. However, the girl was still oppressed by some kind of anxious feeling, and she could not drown it out. Just in case, the lady took with her a bag with a huge space that could fit a lot of things. The girl's intuition did not fail her, as this time too she encountered unexpected adventures. One of the workers mistook the heroine for the auction organizer and dragged her along with him. Before Emily knew it, she found herself far away from her family, something she had been trying to avoid all this time. But the fact that she was mistaken for an auction worker because of her mask even played into the hands of the curious girl. The heroine has always had the ability to quickly adapt to any situation, so when Yuli discovered her sister was missing, she no longer planned to go back. The Walker family did not have time to find the lady, as the sale of prohibited items had just begun. Many people had been waiting for this for so long that they quickly began to buy up any secret items they liked. For this reason, assistants barely had time to bring new items to the auction before they were immediately taken apart. So any help from anyone would be very welcome for the organizers who were barely able to cope. Therefore, when Emily was completely ready for work, the aristocracy greeted her joyfully. Miss didn't expect to be immediately given a job that involved checking all the items at the auction. Only thanks to this, the girl immediately stumbled upon notes about a powerful book about dark magic. The heroine couldn't even dream of such luck, because now all she had to do was carefully pick up this item. Curiosity overcame the feeling of security within the lady, and she went to this magical book. As Emily thought, this item was worth seeing in person at least once in her life. Of course, the girl didn't plan to steal the book yet, so she needed to go back. But as soon as the heroine entered the corridor, she came across a huge number of corpses everywhere. But just a couple of minutes ago, Emily walked through a completely clean room without human bodies. Just as the lady was wondering whose doing this was, an unknown voice was heard right behind her. The girl barely managed to jump back in panic, although she understood that she would not be able to protect herself. She almost immediately recognized this guy as the man who had frightened her with his knowledge of the death of the Walker family. This guy's name was Claude Fireball, and he was one of the most powerful dark mages. Right now, he had exactly the same goal as the heroine, because he also needed a book. Even from a distance, the lady could clearly sense how enormous the difference in their strength was. In fact, the young man did not want to kill this lady, in whom he also sensed the beginnings of dark magic. But right now, Emily was a danger to him, because she knew too much. Claude didn't immediately recognize the girl, even though her disguise wasn't even enchanted with magic. As the guy slowly approached her, the heroine was so afraid she couldn't really move. That's how Fireball easily found out that he had been communicating with the daughter of the Walker family all this time. At the moment, her revealed identity was the least of Mrs. Worries, as she was afraid of dying. But Claude didn't plan to kill any of the aristocrats, because that would have caused him problems. Moreover, the sensations that came from Emily constantly attracted the guy's attention to her. Until the wizard had found out all the details, he did not plan to take the life of the lady in question. For some reason, with each passing second, it seemed to Fireball that Emily really could become a promising mage. But among the aristocrats, it was shameful to support dark magic, which was widespread outside the temple. In fact, Claude always had an option ready that no one would appreciate because of its cruelty. The guy didn't mind making the girl his familiar, so that she would continue to remain silent. He didn't care at all what the lady herself would think about such a strange and unpleasant option for her. Emily was only saved from continuing by the appearance of security, who noticed the disappearance of their people at their post. But even the appearance of the knights did not greatly disturb Claude, who was many times stronger than everyone present. Fireball didn't want to engage in battle, only because he didn't want to waste precious energy on it. The knights believed until the very end that they would somehow miraculously be able to defeat the unknown enemy. But with just a snap of his fingers, Claude proved that something like this would be impossible even in 1,000 years. As soon as he cast the lightest spell, the knights began to die right on the spot. They didn't even have any protective amulets against powerful dark magic with them. Fireball did not spare any of them, as he did not care about every person in his path. He was so eager to get the book that he didn't pay attention to people's lives. The heroine understood that she did not have enough strength to resist such a powerful magician. However, the girl could not just stand and watch as Claude stole something dear to her. In a panic, the lady tried to at least find out the name of the acquaintance who knew so much about her. Surprisingly, Fireball reacted calmly, and even said his name for the first time in a long time. It was precisely this delay on his part that the heroine needed all this time to come up with a plan. Only now did Emily remember that she had the opportunity to move the lot straight to the top. This is exactly what the lady did in order to be able to pick up the book herself a little later. Claude was clearly not prepared for some girl to so easily outwit his plans. The host had already announced the delivery of a book about dark magic, so it was too late to run. But no one expected that along with the book, strange people would also appear on stage. It is not surprising that many aristocrats were outraged by such disorder on stage. Everything that was happening was not in Fireball's favor, but he tried to contain his anger until the very end. The guy understood perfectly well what enormous consequences would arise if he declared a fight right here. But the heroine provoked the young man in time, as she saw that he would not be able to bear it any longer. And Emily was right, as Claude quickly went into battle mode the moment he got angry. Meanwhile, Yuli still couldn't get the strange absence of her beloved sister out of her head. She couldn't figure out where Emily had managed to disappear to at such an important moment. Meanwhile, the auctioneer conducted the sales according to schedule, without dwelling on details. As soon as the girl heard that a very ancient object was about to appear, she forgot about everything. Edmund deliberately woke up Isak, who wasn't even trying to concentrate on things. And at exactly that moment, the heroine appeared on the set with a book, which no one expected. Upon seeing the unknown person, the guards reacted immediately, as they were prepared for such incidents. But Claude didn't even think of being scared, although he was unhappy that he had been discovered. Fireball had enough power to easily kill everyone in that massive hall. The heroine realized with horror that the guards would hardly be able to cope with this magician, but in this situation, she could do nothing to help, and all she could do was run away with her family. Isak appeared just in time, demanding that his sister follow him obediently. This time, Emily didn't argue, because she really was in a dangerous situation. As soon as they were reunited, Yulia's anxiety gradually began to disappear at the sight of her beloved sister. But the entire Walker family was still in danger, as Claude had started attacking people. That's why the middle brother didn't hesitate when he picked up his sisters in his arms for a quick escape. Many aristocrats ran in panic to the doors, which were now the only way out. This made Edmund realize that they were unlikely to escape if they followed the crowd. But all this did not create problems for Isak, who had accumulated strength within himself due to the recent ritual. So the guy quickly broke through one of the walls, which was impossible for an ordinary person. Even after such a powerful blow, the guy still had plenty of strength to carry his sisters away from here. While they were in his arms, the young man's speed hardly slowed down along the way. But Edmund had a hard time escaping, since not much dark power was poured into him. Isak himself was surprised that there was still a huge amount of energy inside him. Emily clearly remembered that after his recent death, her brother was practically unable to lift a sword. But before, he was the most powerful swordsman in the Empire, and everyone was afraid to stand in his way. Isak's talent was superhuman strength and speed, which he inherited from his ancestors. Only now did the lady realize that her brother had been a monster before. So little had changed for him. They managed to escape just in time, because the entire auction building suddenly went up in flames. When Edmund invited his family to this event, he didn't think there would be such consequences. The most important thing was that even fragile Yuli was not harmed during the enormous danger. What frightened the family most was the presence of that terrible magician who possessed power. Yuli was ready to scold her sister all day for not running away from that man. As usual, Isak came to the girls' aid, trying to reconcile them in their huge disagreements. Only now, Emily admitted that she had already seen this guy once, although she had not told anyone. This circumstance made Edmund nervous, since he personally could not remember that man. He always tried to control everything that concerned the safety of his family and friends, so the guy demanded that his sister tell him everything in detail in their estate. The heroine suspected her brother would react this way, which is why she tried to remain silent all this time. The saddest thing for the family was that they were unable to buy back or steal the book on dark magic. But it turned out that Emily had managed to hide the item in a bag with a huge amount of space. No one expected such agility from a girl who always seemed quiet and timid. But now the heroine was displaying miracles of impudence because the lives of her family depended on it. Meanwhile, Claude was still in the middle of the bloody massacre that he himself had caused. The guy was upset that he couldn't find the book anywhere, even though he had come specifically to steal it. Suddenly, a memory of a young girl's menacing gaze appeared in Fireball's mind. So the young man no longer doubted that it was she who took such an important book for him. No matter how strong Claude was, he didn't want to constantly waste his energy on people. So this time he chose to escape, even if he ended up returning empty-handed. Fireball wasn't too upset that some of his plans were unexpectedly disrupted. This is all because the guy had a lot of patience, so he could easily wait for the right moment. The next morning began for the heroine, with her meeting the priest again. But the lady simply came to work. But even here, she could not be alone in peace. The guy arrived so early in order to secure another meeting with the heir to the throne. He was also glad to meet Emily, who seemed more and more like a good person to him. But the girl herself could hardly bear the holy energy, of which there was a lot in the priest. As Miss thought, the first thing Zion said was about the dark magicians he was fighting against. But the lady easily changed the topic of conversation to compliments in order to quickly confuse the guy. This worked so well because the young man had not previously received any reaction to his good looks. For some time after the embarrassment, the priest was truly unable to continue the conversation normally. Seeing such a reaction, Emily only began to press harder on this tender spot of her interlocutor. He eventually admitted that in his temple, it was not customary to praise people's appearance and personality. The priests had a strict upbringing, although they still remained ordinary people. In Emily, the guy saw the same beginnings of strength that he had once accidentally awakened in himself. It was not difficult for the lady to lie that all this could be due to divine blessing. Every person in her family has had some useful gift since ancient times. This information interested the priest, and he expectedly asked to tell more. It was at this moment that Emily announced that she could sense the presence of dark magic around her. She tried her best to become useful in the eyes of the priest so that he would not suspect her of anything. And it worked, as Zion developed a strong respect for the girl after what he learned. The guy always tried to gather special people around him to fight dark magicians. That is why he even went against the temple and achieved an audience with the heir to the throne. But Zion wasn't going to stop there, because now he was interested in getting to know the girl better. The heroine could not have imagined that her sweet words would turn into such problems in the future. However, Emily had no right to miss the chance to get closer to the priest, who was dangerous for her. That's why she still secretly met with the priest the following weekend. The lady was very surprised when she realized that this time, Zion went for a walk without security. But the guy was confident that his strength would be enough to protect the two of them if necessary. All this time, Emily had to give in to the young man so that he would continue to treat her well. However, she dared to ask the priest why he had called her to the meeting in the first place. It turned out that Zion had become well aware of the recent explosion at the auction estate. These underground organizations were always the last to be discovered by the authorities due to their secrecy. But that time, so many aristocrats escaped at once that they immediately attracted attention. Zion personally verified that almost all of the items remained unsold in the storage facility. But for some reason, the most important book about dark magic disappeared without a trace after the fire. The heroine was frightened by the fact that the Knights of the Empire were already searching with all their might for any mention of the book. Zion was confident that the book had not burned, and was afraid that this knowledge would fall into the wrong hands. From Leo, Emily learned that the book merely contained information about powerful demons, so everything was not as bad as the priest imagined. But the lady could not calm him down. Of course, the lady had no right to refuse the priest's help, since they had already walked together. The guy was sure that the book was somewhere in the vicinity, because the magical barrier did not work. The lady was never going to admit that the book had been lying in her house all this time. But before setting out on his search, Zion needed to change his clothes. The guy didn't expect that the white color of the cloak would only attract more attention. In his city, priests never had to hide, so he didn't know how to do it. No matter how much embarrassment overwhelmed him, the priest obediently followed his wise and skilled friend. Emily was only glad that the priest was listening more and more to her words. In the end, it turned out that Zion's appearance matched any outfit and color of clothing. The guy himself had no idea how beautiful he appeared to everyone who was watching them. The heroine almost drooled over such a handsome man, which was not her status. As a result, the girl personally paid for all the outfits that the young priest had tried on today. Now that he was wearing a dark robe, few people would pay attention to such a guy. The young man felt a surge of pride when he heard that the lady had paid for his purchases herself. But Zion was not in a position to buy anything for itself in secret from the main temple. That's why the guy had to gratefully accept the help of the lady he liked. Emily had no idea that from childhood, the priest had been forced to wear only white. The guy himself didn't regret anything, because this was the only way he could concentrate all his strength within himself. Zion planned to continue searching for traces of dark magic, but the girl had other desires. While she had the opportunity, she tried to distract the priest from searching for the forbidden book. This turned out to be easy, since Zion had not walked the city streets like an ordinary person for a very long time. So the guy was surprised even by the delicious food that was sold in large quantities at the market. At the end of their little adventure, the lady dragged her friend to the highest tower in the city. This was because it offered a wonderful view of any location in the main center of the empire. Emily hadn't shown anyone the city as she saw it with her own eyes for quite some time. After what he saw, Zion completely forgot that he was supposed to be looking for traces of dark magic. Now the guy was genuinely enjoying the walk, because it would be a while before he would be able to get away for a rest. From time to time, the lady continued to embarrass the priest by telling him what a handsome man he was. Her family, even for a long time, did not want to let Miss go for a walk when she saw the priest's face. But the girl did not take offense at them, because she understood that they were just worried and concerned. Suddenly, Zion came to the conclusion that Emily's loved ones truly loved her very much. Just like that. It was strange for the heroine to hear envy in the words of someone who had always received love from God. In the end, the priest was very grateful to the girl for showing him the beautiful city. To further appease the priest, the miss reported that she did not feel any dark magic during the walk. But Zion himself did not expect that their search would be completed so quickly within a day. He was very worried about Emily, because it wasn't only her family that was in great danger. The dark magicians, locked away on the island, needed to free the souls of certain people. Previously, the heroine had not heard that her family were descendants of one of those priests. Many years ago, 13 people sacrificed their lives to lock away the dark magicians, and Zion knew that the prisoners were now looking for everyone who was connected to those people by blood. This information turned out to be too frightening for the girl, who had hoped for a favorable outcome. Of course, the priest was ready to provide any protection to the descendant of the great priests. That's why any help from a lady who could sense dark power was so important to him. As soon as Emily let it slip that she had suspicions, Zion immediately became interested in it. It was time for the heroine to deal with Penelope, so she boldly pointed her out. Inside herself, the girl had no doubt that Swanson was a real dark magician. It turned out that Zion wanted to share this story with another person who was nearby. All this time, in fact, the priest did not walk without protection. Although it was not noticeable, the heroine was horrified by the fact that now the amount of holy power would become even greater. But she could hardly stand the feeling that constantly emanated from the powerful Zion. As soon as the priest called his assistant, this man immediately appeared nearby. What was unusual was that instead of an accompanying guy, Zion chose a girl for himself. But what surprised Emily most was that it was her old friend named Hazel Bissett. All this time, the lady believed that the girl simply visited her estate after returning. It turned out that the priestess had already been conducting an investigation at the request of Mr. Zion. Only the lady was dissatisfied with this circumstance because her friend had not promised her anything. Hazel had been serving the high priest for several years now and had never regretted her decision. Zion only invited Basset because he believed that friendship would support young Emily. The priest tried to act with the best intentions, but only worsened the heroine's condition. However, she did not admit that she felt worse near the holy power. Instead, the girl told how she had recently received an invitation to a banquet. Of course, she didn't refuse Natalie's request, but she felt strange at that tea party. Hazel and Zion were interested in the words of the lady, who seemed to feel foggy in her head. Just in case, the heroine wrote it all off as something that might have just seemed that way to her at the time. But Basset was absolutely sure that Penelope had died, even when they were studying together at the academy. Emily deliberately did not reveal this fact in order to cast suspicion on Swanson. According to the girl's plan, she will deal with the dark magician with the help of her holy friends. Although Miss felt sorry for using Hazel, she had no other choice now. A little later, Zion returned to the conversation about Penelope's actions being strange. His assistant had no doubt that Swanson should have been dead long ago. She was confused by the fact that Emily and Natalie didn't remember this, as if something had been done to their minds. All this time, the priest carefully watched the reactions of the unstable Hazel. His document stated that the girl could easily lose her temper at any moment. But now Zion needed her protection, so he turned a blind eye to such dangers. The next morning, Hazel personally met her beloved friend to take her to the priest. The heroine did not expect that Basset would observe all the formalities, despite their friendship. But the priestess was very eager to show how majestic she had become as a result of her service in the temple. The question of what had happened to their mutual friend Natalie still hung between them. Hazel admitted that she had gotten involved with Spencer, and she hadn't changed a bit since the academy. This calmed the priestess down a little, although they still had to sort out this situation together. Meanwhile, Basset led Emily to the prayer room where Zion performed his ritual every morning. As soon as the heroine crossed the threshold of the room, she immediately felt the full power of the holy force. Nothing like this had any effect on Hazel herself, because she contained the same magic within herself. No matter how bad Emily felt at that moment, the sight that opened before her amazed her. So much warmth and light was concentrated in one room simply because of the priest's prayer. At such moments, Zion was not distracted by anyone, because he was faithful to God until the very end. Only when he finished the ritual did the guy notice his friends who had come to see him. The heroine immediately thanked the priest for restoring her memories, although she had not lost them. But the priest was sure that he really helped the girl who was under the influence of dark magic. That's why he was worried about whether the lady would be able to do everything to eliminate the dark magicians. It was clear from the heroine's face that she was not delighted, because the girl had no intention of killing herself. In fact, Zion no longer suspected Miss, but only wanted to get help from her. So Emily quickly realized that she had nothing to worry about because she was protected. It turned out that the priest was finally convinced that Penelope was a powerful dark magician. But the lady didn't expect to be asked to act as bait to deal with Lady Swanson. For now, Zion had no other plan, but he could promise any protection to the girl and her family. From the very beginning, the heroine suspected that her help to the priest could lead to such consequences. She found herself a hostage in this situation, so she could not refuse Zion's request. According to the priest's plan, Hazel was to be the first to go on reconnaissance to the Swanson estate. Once it is confirmed that Penelope is a dark magician, Basset will quickly deal with her. In that situation, the priest did not feel sorry for the people who could become Penelope's hostages, but the lady could not support her friend in this, because her acquaintances were also under the influence of the dark magician. But the priest believed that any dark magician could create incredible chaos and disorder, while Emily personally only made a mess on her desk. However, it was impossible to convince Zion of his opinion that all dark magicians were terrible. The guy believed that every person who uses such powers should be exterminated, and this time the heroine's opinion diverged from her friends, since she did not consider herself a danger to society. The girl did not choose this path for herself, and now she could only be killed because of dark forces. Zion was so grateful to the lady for her help that a joyful smile never left his face, while the heroine was thinking that the dark magician would fight against dark magicians. However, she still came to Penelope's event, who was glad to see all the guests, Emily tried not to reveal the fact that dark forces were concentrated within her as well. This time, the girl was prepared for Swanson to resort to further manipulation. That is why the lady took her friend with her. Although she did not warn Penelope about her arrival, the holy magic that was concentrated in Hazel could be felt by anyone from the outside. But the heroine had managed to get used to the holy power, so she could calmly stay nearby. But this caused problems for Penelope, since the girl tried to avoid communication with priests. As soon as they shook hands in greeting, Emily felt a tension throughout her body. Swanson quickly distanced herself from the priest, because contact with her caused her pain. As soon as the girl ran away, Hazel and Emily exchanged glances, because they were sure of their suspicions. The heroine had to be the first to enter the main hall, the atmosphere of which frightened her to the point of horror. The most terrible thing was that none of the aristocrats paid attention to the oddities. Only Emily clearly felt that with every second she was getting worse from being here. But the girl had no right to turn around at the very beginning of the journey, because she needed to save her friends. She was so deep in thought that she didn't immediately notice the approach of the cheerful and sociable Natalie. Spencer had become so drunk within a few hours that she barely realized what she was saying. Only the heroine knew that this was one of Penelope's methods for clouding the mind. In this situation, the girl could not help her friend in any way, because she did not notice any danger. Only Emily felt Swanson's pressing gaze, although she continued to smile sweetly. Now the lady especially regretted that she had not been more active in training with Leo. After all, now it was hard for her to even look in Penelope's direction, let alone talk about conversations. With all her might, the lady tried to refuse any offers from the dark magician, but Swanson pressed her energy, forcing the girl to drink the offered drink. So the heroine had no choice but to pretend that she didn't understand anything. Although, in fact, Emily remembered very well that exactly the same situation had happened at the tea party. Penelope never lost sight of anyone who aroused the slightest suspicion in her. For this reason, Miss pretended to obey Swanson, just so she would leave her alone. In the end, the girl was satisfied, but she still wasn't satisfied with what she had done. She had come up with a cunning plan in advance to test everyone present at the banquet. The lady had no right to make a mistake, because her wishes were about to come true soon. That's why she called the maids, who obediently distributed the tasteless onions to everyone around. Emily also had to accept this food, although the girl did not understand where it was all leading. At first glance, the onion was no different from others that people add to dishes. Penelope's intention became clear when she announced that instead of onions, everyone had delicious apples in their hands. Many people immediately began to admire the freshness and juiciness of the taste offered to them. Only a few of them said that they were not actually eating a ripe apple at all. Penelope had little conversation with such aristocrats because she forced them to drink. Once the liquid had its effect on the brain, people again considered the onion in their hands to be a tasty apple. Only now did the heroine realize that she was lucky because she had drunk too little of the drink. But now the girl faced a difficult question: whether or not to eat this tasteless onion. The lady could only hope that no one would notice her in the midst of the huge crowd. But all the girl's hopes were quickly dashed when she discovered that one of the servants was watching her. It was Herman, who always tried to do everything so that his beloved mistress would not get angry. The boy approached Emily in order to persuade her to eat the onion, as the others did. But as soon as the girl complimented him, the assistant immediately broke into a joyful smile. Herman constantly received only punishment from Penelope, which is why he was so susceptible to pleasant words. All this led to the fact that he almost began to consider the cute girl his friend. So Emily took the risk of confessing to Herman that she had a terrible allergy to apples. But these words did not deceive the guy, who also contained a bit of dark magic. He immediately realized that the lady was lying to him, but promised not to tell anyone about her words. Only now did the heroine realize that there were two powerful dark magicians in this room at once. This changed her plans greatly, as Hazel was unaware that the situation had changed. But their conversation ended there, as Penelope urgently called her assistant to her. Herman did not dare to contradict his mistress, because she was very terrible and formidable when angry. With her actions, Swanson hoped to finally outshine the annoying Claude. That's why she got her hands on so many people, trying to cloud their minds. The only question left for the lady was what to do with the priestess who was on the estate. All of Herman's attempts to persuade the lady not to touch the priest ended in failure. Penelope had only recently become a dark mage, so she didn't feel any danger around her. She was maddened by the fact that God somehow had favorites with holy powers. While she couldn't get to them, the girl preferred to take out her anger on her assistant. Herman had lived in this state all his life, so he didn't know that he could complain at all. In Penelope's eyes, she could not lose, because everyone around her was ready to die for her. So the girl waited impatiently for the appearance of the holy knight, and soon Hazel came. All this time, she explored the estate and was horrified by the scale of the disaster that had been created. After everything she had seen, Bisette had no right to retreat, because many people could have suffered. No matter how scared the girl was, she still took out her holy sword to rush into battle. But Penelope didn't even flinch at the sight of the sword that could easily take her life. All because she quickly ordered people to attack Hazel to stop her plans. But all this time, Bisette had not trained in vain, so she was able to get through the aristocrats. Before Swanson could blink, the priestess was at her side in a matter of seconds. But the blow never reached the dark sorceress, because her faithful assistant protected her. Herman's ability was transformation. Although the boy himself did not like this type of magic, but he became so strong that he could easily protect his owner from any danger. Although Hazel hadn't prepared for this, she wasn't one to back down in the face of danger. The girl boldly attacked at the moment when Herman's transformation had not yet been fully completed. The result was such a terrible blow that part of the estate shook piteously. The heroine had no idea that her friend had become so strong in a short period of time. In the end, Herman was unable to do anything against the priestess, who fought so desperately and bravely. But Penelope already had a plan for this case. Because she took Natalie hostage, Bisette loved her friend, so she quickly made the decision to meekly surrender. But in fact, Swanson was lying, because she needed all these people safe and sound, all because the girl planned the most large-scale sacrifice for her demon. Since all the people were assembled, she immediately began her main performance for the evening. Penelope has accumulated enough strength to once again summon a powerful demon. All this time, the heroine carefully watched the lady's actions in order to have time to stop her. Not long ago, Leo confessed to her that he already knew about the contractor, with whom Penelope was involved. The demon taught his mistress how to properly recognize his relatives during the ritual. Leo was sure that only during the summoning would Emily finally understand what kind of demon Swanson had. So all this time, the heroine was frantically waiting for this very dangerous moment for herself. Thanks to Leo's instructions, she easily guessed what kind of demon Penelope had summoned. While Swanson had no idea, each demon only liked certain offerings. That's why she foolishly promised him a bunch of sacrifices in the hopes of gaining greater power. But the lady saw that this demon was not particularly interested in human offerings. At this moment, the heroine noticed that Hazel was still struggling in this state. The girl couldn't let her friend find out about her abilities in dark magic. That's why she carefully put Bisette to sleep, so she could personally sort out this terrible situation. As soon as the priestess fell asleep, Emily gathered the courage to take action. Penelope clearly didn't expect that any of the people she zombified would retain any sanity. In this situation, Herman found himself helpless, since he liked Lady Emily. The girl boldly turned to the demon, whose name was Seleos, since she knew methods against him. The demon clearly didn't expect that some girl would dare to chase him away right during the ritual. But the heroine had a compelling argument in the form of several bottles of the best alcohol. Penelope clearly didn't expect her contractor to suddenly become interested in regular alcoholic drinks. While the girl was in shock, Emily was already in full swing, bargaining with the cunning and impudent demon. In the end, victory went to Lady Walker, since Seleos was only weak in drink. This is how easily the heroine managed to deprive Penelope of the support of the powerful demon. Who would have thought that Emily had no chance of losing, because she made a contract with a powerful demon? Seleos sensed this perfectly well, and therefore obediently followed the young girl's bribe. As soon as the demon disappeared, Penelope was left without much support, although she had been counting on something else. For the first time in her life, Swanson was so upset, because her plans somehow quickly fell apart. Herman immediately noticed the lady's condition, which made all his fur stand on end with anxiety. But what confused the assistant even more was that Emily was smiling despite the chaos around her. The servant clearly felt the enormous dark energy emanating from the girl he liked. Without Seleos' support, Penelope would not have been able to defeat the heroine, who was strong. But the lady herself had no idea that she had lost, so Herman had to act on his own. The assistant deftly picked up the lady in his arms, so that no one could catch them during their escape. As soon as Penelope disappeared into the distance, the fog gradually cleared. In fact, the heroine was bluffing, since her condition would not allow her to use magic. But Emily was glad that the aristocrats gradually began to come to their senses after what had happened. Each of them was surprised that for some reason they were eating onions and also drinking a lot of alcohol. Many did not even remember how exactly they ended up in this place, because they had completely different things to do. While people were coming to their senses, the heroine was getting worse, as she had used a lot of her powers. At the last moment, Zion finally showed up, but his holy treatment only made things worse, so the lady collapsed, exhausted, into the arms of the guy who could do nothing to help her recover. When all the victims had been taken away, the priest personally examined the scene of the strange incident. What surprised him was that Penelope was clearly trying to kill Emily, even though there was no reason to do so. He definitely felt that a great demon had been summoned, but for some reason, none of the people were harmed. Zion found an explanation for himself in the fact that Emily took the full brunt of the fight against the demon. The guy deeply regretted that he had not managed to appear at the estate in time to help, but what puzzled him most was that he sensed 3 dark energies in the estate.